Sudden death approached the main character in a way he had never imagined resurrection. Again, Almas found himself in another world. Perhaps it was the afterlife, but neither the Sansiu River nor the familiar flower garden they spoke of was here. At first he was consumed by intense hunger, and he even thought about chewing the leaves nearby. Later he decided to search for food around. Holding in his hands a freshly caught fish and a rather scary-looking beetle, Almas thought he was already dead, and perhaps for the first time in his life he could simply eat his fill. When Almas ate something alive, he was seized by horror, and this fear only grew later. Almas sat confused and could not understand what had happened after all. He had previously died in a car accident near the river. By the river he looked with horror at his reflection in the water. Almas did not recognize the face looking back at him. He suddenly thought, had he already died yet still lived, reborn as someone else? He thought it might be reincarnation into another world, or perhaps more precisely the transfer of the soul. Almas then assumed it was just a dream and decided to fall asleep with this thought, believing that when he woke up he would be in a hospital bed and that the accident was just a minor collision. The next morning, Alams first rushed to the stream to look at his reflection. He needed to accept that he was in another body. Almas, optimistically minded, began preparing the essentials to survive in this forest. Griffin appeared, gently called, and quickly left its territory. Saw its reflection and got scared, and the griffin spoke mockingly. It said that it has its own standards in food and does not want to bother with eating that terrible griffin meat. It thought about how it was thrown into this strange world hungry. Last night it had to eat insects to survive, and now it was screaming in despair at another's body. Everything in this world seemed abnormal. It sincerely apologized to the griffin for entering its territory. And everyone talked about the contract between griffins and humans. Even children knew about it. It asked the griffin to confirm its opinion and said that its presence would save it if the explanation made sense. The griffin, although he would not believe it, had to protect his own life, so Almas decided to tell the truth. His soul had inhabited this body without the knowledge of the forest and the owner himself, and the griffin listened until he realized that Almas was lost. It apologized and again urged Almas to adapt to this new world and hate his own. If he hoped for anything after that conversation, it would be a sad fate. The griffin agreed to spend time with him, but on one condition. He needed Almas's help. The griffin led Almas to a huge cave full of small grifflings who looked at him confused. They asked what it meant. The griffin explained that these were his relatives, and for some unclear reason, people recently had been leaving their children in the forest he created. Almas thought about his own body. Had he also been thrown there once because of hunger? He asked the griffin if his task was to take care of these children. The griffin praised him for understanding so quickly and asked him to care for them until they learned to care for themselves. He did not refuse those children from the shelter. He understood them, but the problem was food. The griffin understood his concerns and promised to provide food for 3 years. After that, Almas and the children would have to adapt and find food themselves. Almas was surprised. He thought the griffin would tell them to eat insects. Some believed that Almas asked the griffin why those children were saved. The griffin replied by asking if he would leave hungry and helpless children alone, and he said that having saved them once, he must see the matter through to the end. Almas noticed a small pile of fruits in the cave and suspected that Griffin had brought them. They were completely different, and Almas felt that Griffin needed his help because he did not understand how to care for him as a human. Almas nodded and, saying he understood, agreed to take care of the children from now on. He turned to the children and loudly announced that from now on he was their leader. The children responded, but Almas did not understand their language. Griffin apologized and explained that someone from another world here could not understand their language. Although he was here, through his divine blessing he could communicate with Almas. Griffin offered to lend Almas his protective power of sacrifice to Almas. This sounded like an incredible power from a fantasy world. Receiving help, Almas was surprised to find that he now naturally spoke and understood the language of the foreign children around him. Suddenly, as if by a miracle, everything became clear. A boy named Ron stepped forward and called himself the current leader. Almas seemed indifferent, but gladly greeted him and began asking names around until Ron got angry and approached Almas, saying that he did not recognize him as a leader. Almas laughed, realizing how suddenly the boy felt like the new leader, approached to apologize and explained that Ron did not mean harm, he was just a little foolish. Almas watched a group of homeless children. At first glance they seemed happy, but he was sure they were suffering. He promised to protect them and was already thinking of starting a farm so they could survive here. He had little knowledge of agriculture, but saw no other choice. Griffin said he would help only for 3 years, so 31 children and Almas had to manage to become independent by that time. Ron skeptically asked if Almas understood how hard it was to work the land, especially in a dense forest where you simply cannot do without trees. The biggest problem was finally solved. They were all children and barely knew how to hold tools, and Rose, the feudal lady, pressured Almas to give up. Grem disagreed, said they had no other plan, rejected the childish idea of fighting, and ordered to look for tools for working the land, because with the right implements everything would be easier. Almas brought a huge pile of swords left by foolish warriors. He knew many heroes came to defeat Griffin, but Griffin himself, stunned by the amount of weapons, complained and was irritated because these abandoned swords spoiled his forest tetra. He stepped forward and asked if Almas intended to exchange this weapon for agricultural equipment from Uriel. A spark lit in Ron's eyes when Ron suggested instead using the weapons to buy food, but Almas ignored him again, and Ron wondered if anyone knew this area. Tetra replied that yes and began to vividly describe where they were. They were in the Romelia forest, the Kingdom of Roses to the east, to the northwest, the Kingdom of Gilbed to the northeast, Domerga to the north, Faldarm. In Roses they were bad at making iron tools. Domerga and Gilbed would take advantage of the hunger to attack Faldum. This was their chance, because this weapon was valuable and could be sold for a high price. Almas realized that this was a great opportunity to sell weapons at a good price, and then exchange the money for agricultural tools. They discussed rice planting and planned it with Griffin, who told him that 30 years ago people lived in the nearest forest but abandoned it due to an epidemic attributed to his curse. Griffin picked up Almas and flew to find a place, and the terrain suggested it was more convenient to use an already existing plot than to clear a new one. Almas discovered that there was clean water in the village and only small repairs were needed. Most importantly, a free, prepared plot of land for growing rice. He thanked Griffin for finding a better place than expected, and Griffin indifferently replied that it was nothing special and not worth making a problem out of it. The next day, Almas took the children there and explained the crop rotation plan. Almas told the children about crop rotation. They would alternately sow clover and wheat in a 4-year cycle, but Ron doubted the complexity of the plan, saying that it would exhaust the soil and make it harder to patiently cultivate the land. Then Griffin explained to Ron and others that she would help restore nutrients in the soil so that it could be sustainably cultivated throughout the year. He also mentioned that manure from livestock would serve as fertilizer and further restore the soil. Sustainable actions of both livestock and land were the essence of all this, like magical crop rotation. However, there was a downside. The harvest fell because the land was divided into 4 parts for livestock, but the big plus was that they got animals, and this was Rosewood's first step. Hearing this, Rosewood frowned and did not understand. Almas briefly explained that crop rotation would give a better harvest than usual, cheered everyone up, and said that their first task was to go to Ruru. Interested in what had kept Almas so busy, Ruru pointed to a wasteland and thoughtfully suggested raising goats. They would even survive on bark, were easy to care for, even children could handle them, though they could not be called hardworking. He himself leaned more towards cows or horses but had no experience with them. Whereas goats were familiar, the shelter kept a domestic goat. Ruru doubted how urgently animals needed to be raised, and suddenly Griffin replied that goat milk, though unpleasant in taste, provided extremely nutritious food rich in calcium and balanced in nutrients. Almas turned to Ruru and asked if she understood what he had just said. Ruru smiled and nodded she understood. He was worried about everyone. Ruru listened to Almas's next plan but loudly asked how they could even trade livestock amid terrible hunger. She disagreed and did not believe that the Kingdom of Roses needed a large stock of weapons. He quietly muttered to himself about the necessity of doing this and asked Griffin to fly to a distant place. Griffin agreed without hesitation to bring back goats for Almas. Almas noticed that Griffin even knew how to talk to goats, although he knew that he was just leading them to the pen. When they were about to exchange goats, everything seemed like real magic, and Almas took a bow with an arrow so they could practice shooting and later learn to hunt, but the children kept mocking him. After 10 minutes of shooting, he still did not hit the target. He told the noisy children to quiet down and focus on their training. The others coped with the challenge. The village was silent until the time of Grema came. He attracted everyone's attention and asked to be taught peaceful living, but their peace did not last long. Someone entered the village and Almas heard Rosewood's alarmed cry. He thought that if a weak animal attacked Rosewood he would drive it away, and if it was a stronger beast he would figure out how to snatch Rose from its paws. But when he came closer, he realized it was a man, and Rosewood loudly asked why the man had grabbed him, saying that his parents had already abandoned him, and added that even if he were caught, he would not give that man a crumb of food. He smiled sinisterly, called Rosewood a fool, and revealed that he knew about many steel swords owned by Almas's children. Finally, he understood his intentions. When they arrived there, he rushed to save Rosewood. He shouted to the child to run first and stayed behind to hold back the angry man. The man rose from the ground, holding a large branch, and mockingly asked if Almas was stalling for time so that Rosewood could escape. He teased him and warned him not to cry, and Almas calmly asked why he was there. The man rattled and admitted that he came to steal a steel sword and exchange it for food. Almas thought there was nothing to worry about because he was embarrassed by Almas's reaction. The man asked another question, but Almas suddenly stabbed him, and he had no choice. He had to tell the robber that they would not be responsible for his belongings. Pleasure and fear simultaneously overwhelmed Almas. He knew that the man would come if others found out about his feelings. Almas reluctantly killed him there. Soon the children gathered around, worried, and asked if Almas was okay. He assured them that he was fine and apologized for making them worry. Rose cried loudly because she was afraid that something bad might happen to Almas. Almas comforted the boy, saying that everything would be fine, but he himself was not used to such moments. Griffin came to assess the situation and indifferently said that this had happened before. He admitted it was not easy but reassured Almas not to worry. Interspecies violence is not only a human thing, comparing it to ants on the ground. Although Griffin's words were understandable, unfortunately they oversimplified human nature. He added that it is not usual for creatures, it is difficult for them to harm their own, but now Almas's task is to protect the children and return them to their group. This is their mission. Half a month passed, and although Almas had troubles with the garden, everything finally settled. Now their routine was to guard the field and take care of the simplest things, food and shelter, and Almas, who was in stable condition, announced that he would go to the city for additional provisions. This time they were heading to the Kingdom of Roses, to the capital of Roses, where the streets were packed with people. Almas smiled happily. She had not seen such liveliness for a long time, and the bustling city turned out to be even more beautiful than she had imagined. Ron, like a true leader, got all fired up, pointed to the clothing store, and pushed Almas to go take a look. Almasu was told to calm down and was added that a little excitement is even useful. It helps to notice each other on the street. Their first task was to find an exchange point, because without money you can't buy anything. Having exchanged animal fangs for currency, Almas bought some herbs. Nearest girl hurriedly asked if this was caramel grass. She begged Almas to sell her the potion and convince her that it was not a potion. She got it for free after a successful bargain. Almas curiously asked why she was going to use it. Yuria explained that mixed with marijuana it gives an incredibly mild addiction, and Almas became interested in her upbringing and asked where she was from. She vaguely replied that she lived in a village more than a day's journey from here and asked to be shown where to find the valuable caramel grass. Almas saw no benefit for himself and initially refused, but eventually they agreed that every month she would bring caramel grass to sell for 1 gold coin. Before Yuri's departure, she whispered to Almas that she had received extraordinary protection in the village. She diligently studied the language of this world and could communicate specially with Tetra and others thanks to Griffin lending him language protection. But he knew he would eventually have to return it, and suddenly losing the ability to communicate would be a problem. Almas also began teaching the children basic arithmetic, and Ruru curiously asked what the use of his lessons was. She praised him for the question and explained that they need to learn not only farming, they must know how to trade goods for money. If they don't know arithmetic, merchants can easily cheat them in calculations. They can even become traders and start their own business, and children will have many options for the future. A month has passed since Almas began teaching children arithmetic, and Petra, who was always first, took on the responsibility of teaching others. He approached Almas and complained that in the lessons he was not treated specially and was treated unfairly, so Almas decided to give him special attention to teach him to count large numbers. Tetra asked if everyone in his native country could count, even the little ones compared to her, but Almas considered Tetra the most skillful because she had to memorize Arabic numerals and learn arithmetic. As promised last month, Almas drank an herbal decoction to set off to the city and meet with Yuria. During this journey, Almas could not resist and decided to ask her in more detail about protection. Yuria in response asked if he was interested because she knew about her protection, and Almas sincerely admitted that he really wanted to learn more about it. Yuria knew little, but based on information and documents from several fairies, she was once again convinced that they were good fairies, and it was easy for her to recognize Almas's protection because her own protection allowed her to see others' protections, the same eyes that look through blessings, which Yuria had seen. Unfortunately, he received protection from the king, and he said that the more people see him as a leader, the stronger his abilities will become. Alma's secretly thought this meant children must recognize him as their leader. Alma's wanted to ask her a few questions. Supposedly, she lived on the lands of the Griffin forest in Romalia and even asked if she was not afraid of lice. Griffin cautiously asked where he got the idea that they lived there. Yuria said he saw from afar and his protection was called Eyes of the Sky. He saw people entering the forest and guessed that they lived there. Yuria asked Almaz to explain how he managed to avoid Griffin's curse, and Almaz admitted that actually there is no curse. Now Yuria understood this and promised not to tell anyone. When it was time for Allah to ask why so many herbs and stones, Yuria frankly said that he was a witcher, and a witcher can do many things: cast curses, create a magical barrier to remove a spell, or brew powerful potions. Remember, Griffin said that the current misfortune was caused by people through curses related to Yuria, and Yuria explained that the main culprit was a curse believed to have been cast by a high-level witch. Yuria believed that it was not one man, possibly the whole land, and such a widespread curse could have taken thousands of lives. He reassured Almas, promising that he would not allow this to happen again. Almas, surprised, asked if Yuria wanted to go to Romalia, and Yuria gladly replied that he really wanted to but had to ask his father because he would not go without permission. Thanks to selling herbs and gathering vegetables, the children no longer worried about food, salt, and clothes were in abundance. Almas decided to make them self-sufficient by teaching them to make clay pottery. On the eve of the meeting at the shop, he asked what the most expensive item here was because he wanted to find something valuable to exchange for salt and clothes for Yuria. Looking around, he pointed to jugs completely different from the local ones, stronger, with brighter colors that the nobility liked. Returning to experiments, Almas found a closed kiln in a hot room. By simply closing the chimney and limiting oxygen access, they could easily fire black clay pots which cannot be made in the open air. Unfortunately, now building a kiln was quite simple. He did not know what the potter named Carisha Yuria meant, but with a closed kiln, he was sure his products would be the best. Unfortunately, he announced to everyone that their current goal was to take up pottery, and if successful, their village would become the first to produce its own products. Especially under Griffin's protection, everything became much easier for Almas as winter passed and the new year approached. Griffin brought a group of new children he had with him and found in the forest, and Almas looked at them, noticing that after this winter there were 10 more. He became curious, so he asked Tetra how many types of taxes there were here. She replied that it depends on the country and its power, but usually there are 4. Almas wondered if parents abandoned children in the forest to avoid taxes, and inquired if all these children were from the Kingdom of Roses, because he knew that taxes in Roses were significantly lower. The King of Roses was not known for high levies. Roses, so where did these children really come from? Soyan stood nearby and confirmed that it was true. All the people in Roses were incredible. The Duke's house, called Ash, was betrayed by his subordinates. Moreover, the traitors wanted to separate from Roses. The king, of course, did not accept this, and because of this, internal strife began in Ash's family. As a result, the people found themselves without money for the winter and lost considerable wealth. This conflict led to the decision to introduce high taxes as compensation. Hearing this, Tetra asked again, and suddenly tears welled up in her eyes. She whispered that she knew that her parents also loved her very much. Children cry, it's normal, but she always comforted them no matter what. Seeing Tetra in tears for the first time, Almas pondered her future and the new children who had just arrived. There was much to consider before deciding what to do next while Tetra rested. Almas quietly ordered the other children not to do anything strange and to behave normally. When she woke up, he suspected she would be embarrassed about her recent behavior on the appointed day. As always on this monthly day, Almas went to the city to deliver herbal medicine to Yuria, and this time boldly asked if he could meet her father. He was a little surprised, but they said the father would be very glad to meet her friend, so everything would be fine. Almas had thought about this before, but only spoke about it today. The Romalia forest is surrounded by 4 countries, and the Kingdom of Roses is the most unstable, with constant clashes. It would be much safer for the children to act under the protection of someone powerful. According to Almas's father, Yuria is the most suitable. She has enough strength. Of course, paying taxes is a bit annoying, but he and the children cannot always rely on Griffin's protection on the way home. Yuria was surprised there were so many large houses around. He could not understand for a long time that this was the road to the Almi's palace. He silently wiped the sweat and asked Yuria if he was teasing him. Not funny. Yuria led him to the king himself. He froze in surprise, sincerely rejoiced at meeting Almas, and thanked him for recently spending time with his daughter. Only then did Yuria remember to tell Almaz that her father was the King of Roses, and Almaz asked in a trembling voice why he was not told this earlier, as it was a real surprise. She knelt before the king, who felt honored to be there and also considered it an honor to be your friend. The king told her that this was not necessary as a formality, he just wanted to see her as a friend of his daughter. For the first time he brought a friend home. He always immersed himself in studying magic, so he had no friends, but Almaz's visit was not only for that. She came to the king and he said he acted this way because she was a close friend of Yuria, so he was ready to help with anything. Almaz confessed and told the king the whole truth, and then the king realized that his people had abandoned children in the forest, and now, knowing them, he felt he had to take care of them. Almaz clarified that he was not asking for protection or anything similar, to which the king replied that in any case protecting subjects was his duty. He bowed his head low and sincerely thanked Almaz for caring about the future generations of the people. Almaz could not believe that the king of this country had just submitted to him. The king said that having Almaz's mother among his subjects was a great honor, and he would protect the people and their property with all his might. And he himself believed the children would have a strong foundation for the future, and he felt a little calmer. But the king had 3 requests. The first was that Almaz show him the village so he could personally verify whether Almaz's words were true. The second request was not to part with Yuri to remain her friend, and the last was to ask Almaz to teach mathematics to the princess who returned to the village. Almaz noticed that lately Tetra has been behaving completely differently. She was always thoughtful, but something disturbed her peace, and it wasn't just her. Other children also feel it and begin to notice when something is really wrong. When Tetra is involved, such things cannot be left unfinished after all. These are just vegetables. He approaches her and quietly says, "If you don't want to talk, I won't insist, but at least tell me what hurts." Tetra asks in surprise if he already knows, and Almaz replies that her condition is noticeable to anyone who looks at her, and promises that everything she says will remain a secret. He boldly declares that his name is Tetra Ash. Almaz understands that everything he has become so after he learned about the Ash clan's cleansing that he experienced, and begins to suspect his connection to the Ash clan. Tetra asks if he is not surprised, and he admits that he is a bit stunned and did not expect to find the daughter of the Ash clan here. After a moment of silence, he adds that regardless of Tetra's past or present status, it will still belong to everyone. It seems Tetra understood something and says, "Thank you, I will quietly be sad." She says she knows her parents are no longer alive but does not want to believe it. She always hopes they were just taken captive and cannot forgive a man named Robert Ferme. He was a close friend of her father. People loved him for rising from commoner to nobility, but in return he repaid their kindness with betrayal. Almaz, who understands her, asks if Tetra wants him to avenge her, and he replies that he wants to tear him into 100 pieces but does not want to leave this place, and his friends know. Almaz understands that he seeks revenge for his parents but does not want to lose his home and friends here. He tearfully assures him that no one will leave Tetra. His parents once told him the same. Then Almaz changes the subject. He insists that he is the one who must protect everyone here, even himself, and adds that Tetra is a smart girl, smarter than him. Feeling Almaz's thought, Tetra smiles happily and, hearing his serious words, promises to protect everyone. If she wants to take revenge, let her just say so, and he will help her as much as possible because Almaz does not want her to do reckless acts, as she is very important to everyone. Tetra shyly admits that earlier she heard nothing at all, and Almaz adjusted his manner of communication with her, making it more convincing, so the problem is solved. Months and years flew by. Tetra relentlessly became better at writing, but soon they faced a new problem: taxes. Especially after Griffin's support, as expected, ended after a month, Almaz's village had to become independent, and today he went to the king to discuss education. Surprisingly, the king asked whether Almaz wanted to stop teaching his daughter, or if she no longer liked him. The king warned that if Almaz left, the daughter would become a very lonely being, and Almaz, listening to a series of questions, hastily explained that he had no such intention. He just wanted to understand how long the king expected his teaching to last. The king replied that there was no clear term it would continue until Almaz did it. No one else remained to teach his daughter. Almaz asked with interest whether Yuria had any other friends besides him, and the king sadly replied that there were none. Only Almaz. He could not explain why, except that Yuria was hostile to his family. He had been very close to Almaz before. When asked if the princess was allowed to communicate only with useful people, the king said no. Yuria was of noble birth and others often avoided her, and he himself did not understand this because the princess was a very kind person. According to the king, it could be understandable for him, but the princess could be subject to both curses and blessings. She was very skilled in dark arts, and it was no exaggeration to say that her gift had lived for 1,000 years, so the king even predicted that when grown, his daughter would become the high priestess. He was also worried whether all this would be normal, but the king waved his hand and reassured, "Do not worry, the whole kingdom knew about the princess's talent and many other important things, and Yuria was the only thing that belonged to the king's daughter." This meant that her future husband would become the next king. This was exactly what ambitious people constantly sought, and Yuria sensed such people from a mile away. Almas wonders why the king does not hide that she is a princess so that he could be friends with ordinary people. The king explains that it is very complicated. Everyone around already knows who the princess is, so for security reasons it is impossible for her to leave the palace. Despite her appearance, Yuria is actually very shy, and the king tells Almas that her case is an exception, because the desire to find herbs overcame her shyness, and Almas thinks about reliable children in his village who have never seen her. She takes a risk and asks the king about her village. The king thinks for a moment and says that it is a good idea, but doubts whether the princess can really go there. Meanwhile, Yuria receives an invitation to Almas's village and becomes its first official guest. She has already seen Ron and Rosewood several times, so now she tries to get to know others. Soyeon runs up to Yuria and Almas and impatiently asks about their relationship. Yuria, laughing, says that she is his girlfriend. Hearing this, Tetra quietly pushed Almas, and she immediately began to apologize incessantly. Bolton, the guard who came with her, laughed and said that she was too famous to her own detriment. Almas looked at him kindly and replied that this was exactly what she expected from the princess's guard, thereby showing that she trusted him. Almas responded with a slight smile, asking if that was why Bolton's skills were more than enough to protect the king's only daughter. Bolton modestly asked not to be praised, saying that he was just a drunkard standing nearby. Almas felt that he still had something hidden. Tetra was closely connected to King Roses. She was the daughter of Princess Legos, and if the king found out about this, he would definitely call her personally. Almas also wanted Tetra to return to the Kingdom of Roses for her happiness, but Tetra herself did not want this. She did not want to get involved in politics. Almas whispered that if Bolton found out about Tetra, everything could become very complicated and bad. He doubted that Bolton would recognize her after all. They last saw each other when she was only 10, but that no longer mattered because Bolton himself was the problem, and now he was sitting next to them completely drunk. He stood and watched as the children chatted incessantly and asked Almas what he was going to play with them. After a short pause, Almas suggested that Yuria teach everyone in the village to use dark magic. Bolton did not believe it, took it as a joke, and laughed. How could someone who loves poison more than flowers behave normally? The truth was that Almas was going to teach the villagers various ways to become more independent. He could teach them mathematics but not black magic. In this world, it was important that some girls could become witches of black magic. Men might not be made for this, but it would be useful if they could fight curses, and learning magic would also help Yuria get closer to Bolton's children. Standing next to Almas, Bolton spoke, saying that although he was a guard, he was also an ordinary person, so Almas did not have to be so formal. Almas agreed and asked if it was difficult to become a guard like Bolton, but he denied it and said that King Roses did not care where you were from, only skills mattered for promotion. He was confident that when Almas grew up, at least he would be taken for a government position. If the boy turned out to be even more capable, he might even be given land, because Bolton explained. Their country was unstable and needed help from outside, and the king, supposedly, expected something from Almas. Almas thought that becoming an official was a good idea, but only when the whole village became independent. A few days later, the king summoned him to the palace because he wanted to hear about the report that Bolton had delivered about Almas's harvest collection system, and since it had not been tested anywhere else, this was the main reason for the summons. When Bolton arrived, the princess and Almas enthusiastically showed many devices she had created. The harvesting machine was an invention born during the revolution in Almas's country, but he could not admit that he came from another world and had to honestly say that it had already been tested, and Almas added that his fields did not follow the 4-year cycle like the local ones. King asked whether, in his opinion, this was even possible for the country. The truth was that the combine harvester would not give full efficiency on small plots. Large lands and human support with real effort were needed, and the only way was to make them landowners, but this would be extremely difficult due to political reasons, especially considering the influence of a wealthy family. The king decided to change the subject and said that precisely because Almas was a reaper, he would receive a gift from the king. Almas asked for a horse to work in the field, and the Tsar, generously agreeing, gave him 2 horses and a year of feed for free. then wanted to continue the conversation with Almaz, called his brother, and when all three gathered, the Tsar began asking Almaz what he thought about the political system of his country. Almaz frankly said that it was far from strict. There were many loopholes built on blood ties and control over territories. But it began to disintegrate already in the second or third generation. The king's army and treasury were scattered throughout the country and in the hands of powerful clans. In case of war, such a state would be difficult to govern. The king continued to ask if Almaz had any ideas on how to improve the order, and Almaz said that it was necessary to start with centralized power. The king agreed, and Raymond, his brother, was impressed that someone of such age could think that way. He turned to Almaz for advice on whether this reform was really needed, and Almaz replied that first of all they needed people trusted by the community, authoritative figures. For example, one could create a legend that the Razish family once became guardians of the gods, and during that long conversation they also learned about the king's illness. Almaz directly asked the king how much time was left. King Almaz should not know this. He thought it was like training, it would make him smarter and help solve the problem. After the conversation with the king, Almaz returned to the village with 2 horses, and Soyan was the first to notice this, loudly calling everyone to gather. The peasants rejoiced when they saw the horses. Ron laughed and petted them, saying he was seeing such for the first time. The crowd's attention then fell on a strange girl sitting on the back of a gentle horse, and Almaz explained that her name was Rhea, his servant, because no one in the village knew how to care for horses. It required experience that Almaz brought. The problem was brought to King Rose, and he gave Rhea thorough training in horse care, and Almaz asked to treat Rhea as his own while everyone cheerfully chatted. Grem came out of the forest with a large pig and loudly shouted that he had caught a wild boar. Ron saw Grem carrying a large wild boar, froze in surprise, and asked who he was to scare people like that. Almaz thought Grem was only 12, but his body was stronger than adults. Grem told everyone not to do that and surprised them even more. He used a bow and arrows, so he had many muscles. Almaz looked at the children with satisfaction how they all were growing up. He said the conversation was over and returned to the field with 2 newborn horses because they would have to work 3 times harder than usual. Soyan asked Almaz if he was preparing anything else, and Almaz replied that marijuana, which looks like marijuana, is mainly used for voodoo. It is most often used to relieve pain. Next to hemp seed, very nutritious because it is a round plant. After sowing, it grows quickly even after harvesting. New plants can be planted as mentioned, and this hemp is also used for clothing. Almaz told them that it would be used for threads but not for clothing. He does not know if it will be as effective. It is still an experiment. Griffin will stop supporting the village after this summer, and taxes on village construction have increased, so if they do not find a solution, an economic crisis awaits them. The reason new products had to be created was simple. Almaz immediately got to work. He explained that wrapping paper is too fragile and easily damaged when folded, while folded sheepskin is stronger. The wooden boards are also vulnerable because they are made in a standard size and it is hard to write long sentences on them. So something better was needed to preserve information. So Almaz decided to make paper from available materials and in a few days brought the finished product to the king, who incessantly praised his excellent work. Almaz enthusiastically explains that this is a new product from the village and he wants to present it to the king. The king immediately agrees to buy this product and asks Almaz if he can reveal the secret of papermaking. Almaz pretends to have a headache and says it is not very important to him, but asks if the king will share the profits with the village. The king laughs loudly, says he was joking and there is no need to worry so much, and also agrees to buy paper from the village for 3 years provided Almaz improves its quality. If in these 3 years Almaz achieves the highest quality, the king will buy paper permanently and promote its production throughout the country. But there is one more condition. Almaz cannot sell paper to other countries as he predicted to the king. A year passed so that the information could not be sold to other countries in an instant. When Griffin stopped supporting the village, it sadly declined. I wonder if everything would have happened the same way if he had never met Griffin in the Griffin forest. Griffin praised Almaz, saying that he led the village well and without any losses. Before leaving, Griffin persistently asked Almaz to come more often and let him bring some alcohol if he will be grateful for what Griffin did. Returning, Almaz immediately gathered everyone and joyfully announced this year in Roces turned out to be generous, plenty of fruits and harvest. Like all the others, those born in Rose Ice can now return to look for their parents if they want. Almaz thought that there were so many children born in Rose Y in the village that if they all suddenly decided to return to their families, he would lack working hands. But that no longer mattered. The children needed their parents, the deal with Griffin was over, and these children had the right to return home. Rose shouted Almaz's name and scolded him, calling him a fool. Almaz did not understand her hints. Griffin lowered his guard, and this misled him. Rosewood kept repeating this, though he loved his parents as if they had once abandoned him. He insisted that it didn't matter if they were biological parents who abandoned children are unacceptable. Ruru said they now have more food, but there is no guarantee they won't be abandoned again, and Soyeon added with a sad face that they might be abandoned again or sold into slavery. Rosewood shouted that they never thought of returning there, and everyone shouted in unison that they adored Almaz and did not want to go on such a wonderful day. Almaz was called to supervise Tetra's group practicing magic, and he wondered if voodoo was always so boring. Ruru did not care whether she watched or not, but today was an important lesson, so she should not make noise and distract everyone standing next to Almaz, and she whispered to herself, breaking the curse spells. Next to her truly stood a very complex and incomprehensible Tetra, who was conjuring something she herself called food additives. Almaz wondered if it was really dangerous to eat what was created by a miracle, and gave it all to the passing herd of goats. Ruru looked at Almaz with irritation and said that when she tried to make the tree wither with magic, the tree needed time to wither, and asked if something was wrong with her. As Ruru spoke, she became increasingly angry, saying that nothing works the first time, and even if it did, it would cost a lot of money and effort. Almaz understood nothing. She only hoped it would be useful to hear about the advantages. The children show off their skills a little. The first one, who threw animal fur over himself, claims that it hides the body odor, and then the girl, jumping from roof to roof, says that it makes her invisible. Or she returns like an animal after hunting, jumps out of the bushes to show her affection. Unfortunately, she giggles and says that Ruru never taught a girl such a thing, then asks Almaz if she can, as always, stop complaining about them. This has been since the beginning of their training, and she adds that sometimes she feels a bit like a wild animal. Suddenly Alma remembers and shouts loudly, "Actually, this is my technique. It's incredible how she can transfer her soul into any animal." Ruru laughs loudly and says it's not true. Supposedly, it's voodoo magic. Unfortunately, she doesn't care, and she imagines an owl flying high in the sky, thinking it might be the most magical thing to help her achieve her goal. Imagines a funny scene where Soyeon no longer has a twisted neck like an owl. Can't hold back laughter and calls it a tragic coincidence in their magic study group, angrily asks if Almaz is mocking them, while Ruru stands outside and tells the girl that he understands her feelings, but it's better to let it go. Almaz has no choice, forced to sit in the corner and whisper, pretending that voodoo is a very gentle magic. Ruru does not want Almaz to tease her again, so she approaches and asks about fire magic. She once knew how to create it, but now her village already has fire, so there is no need to waste magic on everyday life. In a year, the village has noticeably changed for the better. Now it is mostly inhabited by 70 people from the kingdom of King Ferme. They left because of high taxes, but the villagers found them unconscious in the forest and brought them back home. Petra informed Almaz that among the newcomers there are 6 adults who get along well with Ron. He says they are strong and even cook together. They enjoy using their farming skills and strength to expand the fields and harvest more crops, so the village now produces enough for everyone, even more than Almaz expected, and he gently says that everything is going well. And then he drinks forest wine to find the griffin. After taking a sip, Griffin smiled and said, "The wine is tasty, a sign that everything is fine in the village." Good, he is very happy that they have become independent and no longer depend on him. This is much better than if the children were dying of hunger. But one day Griffin has to tell Almaz something very important in case of disaster or invasion. If the children need help, Griffin will assist, but the final decision remains with Almaz. Almaz sincerely thanks him but hopes that this will never happen. Griffin also does not want this and insists that Almaz stay away from the forest. Almaz learns that the village is accepting many new adults who came to escape the oppressive rule of a harsh kingdom. The kingdom is often weak before curses, and they repeatedly bring famine. Taxes of the kingdom are rising, and if you don't pay, you are immediately executed. In fact, they want to flee to Roces, but crossing the border unnoticed turned out to be too difficult. Soon they heard whispered rumors about a forest village guarded by a griffin, where orphans lived happily. When a man stepped forward and fervently begged Almaz for help, promising that they would take on any work, suddenly one of them approached Ruru. Someone grabbed her by the hand and asked if she was Ruru. She shouted at the person not to touch her. She suddenly felt when she was left alone it was already too late to pretend to be a mother. Ruru's biological mother was the first to refuse to accept this. Other children also opposed. They were afraid it would spoil their relationship with Soyeon, but Tetra did not believe these people. She suspected a cunning move by the royal company and suggested checking everything as Almaz said. Everyone agreed this time she would go to the company's kingdom to figure out everything she saw and, under Ron's instructions, watch over them while he was away. Alma's found Rhea and told her she needed a horse to go to the company together with Tetra. Tetra asked in surprise if she really intended to ride since she did not know how. Alma showed her a device resembling a pedal and assured her there would be no problems. It was attached on both sides of the horse near the feet, so Rhea could ride without any equipment. But Almas could not return to the world where he lived before the invention of the pedal. Not everyone can become a knight. It is very difficult to control a horse if the feet are not fixed. But with a saddle and a little practice, riding can be easy. Almas kept this a secret. He did not want to get involved in a military campaign. Tetra informed him about this. King Ferme is still an ambitious king loved by many people. But it seems they behave this way because they truly hate him. Before he became a good man, he was very close to his father and their entire family. They quickly found themselves in a village in the kingdom that, as it seemed to them, belonged to real soldiers. The villagers bitterly told Almas that they left in the middle of the night and that teenagers are taught to search for those who fled because of the suffocating taxes he imposed as a merchant. Almas generously offered to ease communication by asking if they intended to return those who fled. Tracks show that those people rushed into the forest. Apparently, they believe in Griffin's paradise. And finding them would not be difficult. The royal company had wizards and hunting dogs. Almas kept asking if Griffin was in the forest and if their arrival would disturb him. The soldiers sadly admitted that they knew, but the king would force them to do it anyway. He didn't care whether it was sacred or if someone was afraid, and one thing was clear: he would never forgive those who fled. When the army brought them back, those people were already just corpses. Almas and Tetra quickly gathered all the necessary information and returned to the village to plan their response. He made it clear to the other children that if they handed those people over, they would definitely be killed. Alma said to 70 people in the village. The army believed it could easily destroy them, but now, with an additional 30 newcomers, their number could reach 100, enough to scare and stop the attack on the village. At that moment, everyone changed their minds and agreed to help because they realized they needed to unite. They loudly shouted that handing them over was cruel, so he also partially agreed, because as soon as King Ferme finds the village, it will no longer be safe there. When the meeting, at which Almas was present, ended, he caught everyone's attention and announced that he would respect their wish to stay here. Everyone rejoiced and thanked loudly. Almas gave a sign to be silent and continued, saying that it also depends on each person's behavior. Almas himself thought about how to tell them about the unwavering forces. Ron ran in panic, loudly reporting that the royal army was still in the forest but undoubtedly heading here. Tetra sensed their approach with magic and understood that it was only a matter of time. Wasting no time, she told everyone who came that the army was coming to capture and kill them all. Fear swept through the village. He could not believe that after fleeing so far, they found themselves in such danger. Earl broke away from the crowd, called everyone to calm down, and stepped forward himself. He bowed low before Almas and apologized, admitting that they had brought trouble to the village. Almas, the village elder, said the matter was serious, but it was already too late to do anything, and passed this on to the king, hoping that he would not ignore their village. Earl bravely promised to defend this place, just what Almas hoped for. He added that although he had little experience in trade and negotiations, he hoped it would be useful. Almas smiled and asked him to help, after which they moved to a cozy corner to discuss their next plan. Almas said this was their home, and when only moments remained, Earl confessed everything he knew. Earl suggested first gathering and convincing everyone that negotiations were better than fighting, but their first task was to arm everyone. Unfortunately, doubts arose. Would the attempt at a peaceful solution be perceived as a provocation, especially since the enemy leader was cunning and invincible? And Earl insisted that they must make them believe that the villagers could win. He began to lay out that the forest was an obstacle, so the enemy could not bring many people at once, and the king's detachment would be insufficient against the village's numbers. Neither the population nor, all the more so, the regular army could act quickly, so most of those who could move were his personal guards. These were the best people he had, and he would not dare lose them here. Earl thought that at the meeting they only needed to agree on conditions and weigh all the pros and cons. For the royal guard, this should go smoothly, and the main goal was simply to warn him not to bring back a body. Earl took the ring off him. His belongings were a sign of ownership for every earl. He had a child who could be traded. He was supposed to trade with King Ferme and his army, entering the dark depths of the forest. He became sad when he realized that running was really troublesome. it would be better if the peasants joined the rebellion because it would be hard for him to catch those who fled. A colleague asked if he was really going to do it. Kill them all, he replied calmly, of course if he lets them go. People would be more willing to follow their orders. This problem was very important, although some were cruel, they had to do it. Seeing the determined faces of his soldiers, he felt pride, then asked him to say what he thinks about the fear of a warrior who is afraid to admit that he now understands the power of the king, and recalls that joy on the face when, after killing Lagos, he gained independence and became a king for the people around him. The king's hatred for the family began to echo, because Lagos was too submissive before Reseda, not due to inability, but because his command skills were brilliant. He wonders where that child came from and was mistaken in letting her escape. Others had already decided that the child was probably dead in the vast forest, she could not survive. While they were talking, the guide suddenly stopped and said they had found his place, but no one expected that there would be a village here. The forest king, stunned, asked again, "Is this the village they whisper about, as if it is protected by a griffin?" It all started with fear of the impossibility of war. Oh God, the king was afraid that his people would stop inventing stories that. He said he had never gotten lost in the forest and met Griffin. Griffin told him that he lived deep in the forest and could do what he did. The people cheerfully moved forward and very soon found the village. By the number of houses and fields, they estimated that about 100 people lived here. Several watchtowers and fences tower around all to keep the wolves out. Today the peasants are armed and ready, just as Earl predicted. The king shouted at his soldiers, "Do nothing I would not do myself." He did not want to lose any of them. Alma stepped forward and proudly introduced herself as the village elder. The king said he came only to punish those who fled the country. Alma firmly replied that the peasants would not allow him to kill anyone and that she could not carry out his orders. The king, filled with curiosity, gestured for Alma to step forward and speak. He did not expect Alma to actually come and sincerely admired her courage. Alma hoped everything would go according to plan, and as everyone wished, that all would remain calm and do nothing unnecessary. Alma approached and said it was a great honor to meet the king, asking if she could come closer. The king replied it was not necessary. He knew Alma did not feel safe. He really wanted to find out why Alma did not want to accept his request. Alma thought this was at least a chance for the king to hear his words. The village was tiny, but if the king wanted to exterminate them, could he spare them? The king did not think so. Those who fled should be punished gently and carefully. He asked if the king could punish them yet still spare their lives, and handed him a ring the count gave as proof of a commoner's death. The king paused for a moment, then ordered Alma to surrender all the rings and everything he had in the village. Of course, he will spare everyone and make sure that everyone has clothes. Almas thought to himself that everything Earl said was true. Calmly, Almas told the king that if he took everything, everyone would perish, so it was worth softening a little, and then his tone became stricter. He said that if the king wanted to take everything, he ordered the village to be burned. The king believed him. Almas's village was too weak to withstand that battle, but agreed to take only 70%. Almas considered this a large percentage, but it was enough for him to agree. After the deal was completed, Almas sighed with relief because the battle did not happen. Tetra asked what to do next, and Almas already had a plan. He would first meet with King Roses to discuss the refugees and necessary actions. Earl was tormented by doubt whether Almas was acquainted with King Roses. He asked to be taken with him, but Almas decided it was better to discuss it alone and apologized, explaining that when he was about to go, he was not the one to decide whether Earl could go with him. Tetra, hesitating, stopped him. Gathering courage, she said that she would also go with Almas, because she did not believe him, and asked him to say it again. Tetra told him that she had been thinking about it all the way and told Almas a lot. He always runs away because he does not want to cause destruction. But the refugees are suffering now. The king is harsh, and as a descendant of the royal line, he considers it his duty to watch over Tetra closely. He spoke about her lonely life. Tetra resolutely declares, if she does not want to do something, no one will force her. She no longer wants to live in fear of the king. She longs for her own Tetra life. She cannot get rid of the thought, will Almas marry her as soon as he resolves this matter? Almas suddenly stops his horse, says with surprise that this is important to him but in a completely different way, and everyone, including Ron, sees it that way. Almas asks her to get down and talk calmly. Family, for him, Tetra has always been a sister just like Ron and Soyan, and everyone in their village is simply friends to him. After a pause, Almas decisively stated that as a man he cannot accept Tetra's proposal. He wants the one who spoke those words to become her husband. Tetra glows with joy when Almas says that they agreed to marry and must do it quickly. They need to meet with the King of Roses. He has not forgotten that everyone is in danger now. Almas painfully recounts all the hardships that befell the village. They lost a lot of food and supplies, and King Rossi's understood everything and promises instead to provide them with food for a year. At the harsh border, protecting refugees is a usual thing. He was glad the village was not set on fire because you cannot collect taxes from the dead, and then the king noticed the girl next to Almas and asked her if she had seen him recently. Embarrassed, the girl quietly replied that 10 years had passed since the king visited their home and met with her and her father. The expression on the king's face became stern. He warned her that as soon as she lied, she would be punished. He asked for Tetra's surname and, covering his face, exclaimed that God had not abandoned him. Then he demanded proof, saying that she had a family mark on her body and whether he should see it. Apologizing for his persistence, the king insisted on confirmation. After she showed the mark, Tetra took out a thin ring and said it resembled the rings of refugees who came to her village. The king, impressed, asked where she had hidden it so securely. Tetra explained that the ring was gold and it was dangerous to always wear gold, especially when everyone needed money, so she hid it under a large tree where no one would notice, and added that if there was no other way, she would consider selling it. Almas burst out laughing and assured that he did not blame her and was not angry at all. The impatient king sharply demanded to stop the private conversation and insisted that the ring be brought to him for inspection while experts examined Tetra's item. Then Almas continued the meeting with the king and Raymond regarding the issue of centralization, which he himself had raised. The king's response was to use the power of centralization as a form of governance, where national power is concentrated in the central government, and this would create the highest centralized authority that would command the army and collect taxes for the current country of King Rasasi, divided into many small regions. To centralize power, unity among them is needed, but even if the king summons that family, they will not necessarily support him, so it is important to gradually reduce the political influence of this powerful family. King asked Almas what it means to apply the force of the entire army. Almas explained that when the people gain more political power, the influence of the royal family weakens as a result. King fears that his power will weaken. Almas acknowledges this but says it does not matter. The main thing is that the king guarantees the rights of the people and becomes their protector against the powerful clan. Raymond understands how power and the state work, but if what Almas proposes happens, the dynamic will change. Powerful clan against the royal family and the people. Unfortunately, Almas agrees and adds that with such changes, if the clan wants greater political weight, it will have to oppose both forces and the monarchy will fulfill its mission, and the king asks if his people will not do the same to strengthen their political influence. Almas considers this possible but leans more toward the idea that the chance of conflict between these two forces is higher. Their influence usually comes from the League of Kesha cities, a republic without a king, while among the Edians who are loyal to the monarchy, the republic is completely different, and this new republic is truly interesting. Almas believed that many people in Adelia are interested in the ideas of the Republican Party. The king dismissed this as Almas's forecast, and Raymond disagreed with the king's notes that the influence was explained smoothly. Their biggest problem is the company's rebellion. The king shows that they, as Alma's desires, have already created a certain form of centralized power, but there is still resistance against it. After Almas's speech, Raymond's attitude softened a bit. He exclaimed that he would take him as his son, but immediately he was overwhelmed by shock and asked his brother what he had just done. Momentarily silent while Almas left the room, and when the door closed, Raymond directly stated that he wants to see Almas on the throne. Although Almas is not the first choice, as the second he is by no means the king's enemy, I do not agree that Almas, though a genius, is just an ordinary person and only 16 years old. Raymond, a year older, immediately asks him about the younger brother as the next king because the first candidate was Raymond himself, but he has no children. If this is not your child, and that man will be even worse for her, then the words of Raymond's fiancée, who protested against choosing a commoner, are better than making that man king. The king is simply mad, constantly chasing after money, alcohol, and women, and he asks his brother if he understands that handing the country over to foreign hands could split it. Raymond disagrees with Victory's persistence and the destruction of the Diable family. That is enough. He still cannot believe, does his brother really want to marry him, the daughter of the man who killed 2 of the king's wives? The king actually does not want this, but if their marriage goes well, Debal, Rizishi, and the whole family work together to subtly implement Raymond's plan for centralization. They begin to doubt whether her brother really believes in this man. The king agrees that being too meticulous is not always best, but he is torn by curiosity. Why did his brother bring another young man into the plan? Raymond begins to study Alma's the second son of Griffin, who has divine influence and traits useful in politics. Although this young man could be helpful, Raymond worries about maintaining family unity. Raymond says that it seems impossible to keep unity. But Almas and Tetra offer an alternative: their previous plan to form an alliance with the Ash family. They even consider marriage, and this fits perfectly into Raymond's plan. Even after the Ash house lost political power, everyone who entered their family through marriage automatically became an adopted child of the king. As Griffin's son, Almas was the perfect candidate for this role. King agreed to the plan, and Almas became his adopted son. But the king still needs time to consider the throne. Almas was called back and told he became a wardrobe boy. Returning to the village from the royal palace, Almas heard loud screams from Ruru and rushed to find out what happened. Ron says that two of Ruru's relatives constantly try to approach her. Everyone gathers to find a way out, but they refuse to listen. Almas shouts loudly, "Can't they just leave the girl alone?" He scolds them and asks if they don't see how tense Ruru is right in front of them. They could not forgive her, even though she decided to forgive them herself. It was not their fault. They decided to pressure Almas so that he would decide. If this continues, they will be driven out of the nearest village. He became curious how would Almas handle this. Almas explained that the more people in the village, the more necessary laws and a certain purpose become, but if he punishes them and the Earl takes care of it, it could cause dissatisfaction. All these problems could have been solved without misunderstandings if Almas had consulted Bartolo. Bartolo suggested digging a canal around the forest. If the king with a strong army wants to break in, he will have to cross it, and so they can defend the village in case of an attack. Almas asked with interest how Bartolo was doing now. His military rank is Bolton. Calmly, he said that he has been leading troops against King Ferme for a year. Almas laughed, thinking that Bartolo only knows how to drink. Bartolo explained that he does not drink much, although he always carries alcohol with him. Although he is a former army commander who has never crossed the border, he was still known. Almas jokingly noted that this does not remove the image of a drunkard from him, and Bartolo suggested taking wooden swords and fighting together. Almas quickly agreed. He considered it a rehearsal before the final clash with Ferme. Surprisingly, Bartolo easily repelled Almas's attack with one blow and, stunned, shouted in disbelief whether someone could really be that strong. Almas apologized for not using all his strength, and Bartolo recalled how Uriah said that Almas has many special abilities. Almas leads him to realization. Seeing that strength, he remains calm, so in a real fight, it will be difficult for Almas to defeat him without relying on his own power. When the group conversation approaches, he admits that he does not want to meet Almas again. Almas asks to join his squads and wants to fight alongside him. One day, Uriah comes to see Ron and others who are training hard, and tells Almas that his blessings can now enhance the strength of those who are loyal to him. This is a completely different blessing. It gives men physical strength and women voodoo. Everyone already knows that Uriah will marry Rigard, and the king asks Raymond not to start unnecessary conversations. Raymond is broken. He thinks about their poverty and believes that any girl would suffer if she were forced to marry a man who killed his wife. He insists that if the brother truly prays for his sister's happiness, he must allow her to be with the one she loves, but the king gives him no other choice. Now in his free time, Almas is again crafting various things, all for the military needs of Tetra, who came from beyond the village boundaries. Tetra asks Almas what he is working on. Thinking that it is normal to tell him that he is making black powder. Black powder first appeared in China, and it is the oldest form of gunpowder. Unfortunately, at first he did not want to bring military technologies into this world, but the king's steadfastness forced him to agree. There was nothing left but to explain to Tetra. Turned out that it was made from charcoal, sulfur, and potassium nitrate. Having explained everything, Almas took Tetra away from his research zone. It was not ready yet, and he could not guarantee her safety. As they were leaving, the black powder exploded. Almas warned Tetra that even a small amount in a suitable container can cause a loud explosion and lead to injuries or death. If this cannot be avoided, cases like a tooth explosion can easily happen. Then add a few pieces of ceramic or metal fragments to finish. A month later, Almas showed his invention to Bartolo, who reported that he was inventing tactics to defeat King Ferme. Almas asked if he knew about those failed tactics with shields and spears against the enemy. On the left, shields were placed for cover because the right flank was weak, so skilled warriors had to be placed there. Bolton admitted that they usually tried to do this supportively, but in the end the outcome of the battle depended on luck. Then Almas suggested, What if the cavalry attacks both of Bolton's wings? And Bartolo recognized Almaz's ingenuity as brilliant, but added that not everyone can become a knight overnight. Almaz recalled that he came not for talks about battle, but to show him black powder, and when an explosion thundered right before their eyes, Bartholomew was confused and asked how Almaz did it. His inventions always seemed to make the heart leap into the throat. Bartholomew wondered if it could be repeated. Almaz assured that the discovery allows doing even more and that they will definitely win the battle, but warned not to get complacent. Such a thing can happen anytime, to which Bartholomew smiled and showed that Almaz was too confident. Almaz and the peasants tirelessly prepared for the battle that was coming in 2 years. The company king quickly passed by upon hearing the news that another clan had switched to the Ash family side. 2 years had passed since Tetra was found, and the Ash family began to recover. The growing number of rebels worried him, but he felt lucky when he learned about the fall of the Rose's kingdom. He decided that the king had been ill for a long time and instantly felt this was their chance. Without a leader, the squad could easily capture Roses. The soldier nearby was worried due to lack of full information, but the king angrily asked what he meant and insisted that they had long been preparing for this war. In 3 days they planned to attack and rob Roses, using a shortcut through the forest to catch the enemy by surprise. The soldier fearfully asked if this would not anger Griffin, but the king waved it off, saying Yatter had already safely passed through that forest before. The most difficult thing, he said, was to find that secret path through the forest, which was revealed thanks to the deserters. People still doubted, but the king believed that the village was protected by the Griffin. The king demanded explanations as to why the Griffin did not appear when last time they took almost all their food. If the villagers do not surrender, they will be destroyed, and the king believes that no matter what happens, they will obey his order. The witch sent a bird spirit to spy in the forest, and when it was already about to return, the witch was attacked. Frightened, she asked herself why they were afraid now. Perhaps it had suffered a divine attack, and this happened only after the third bird message. The witch suddenly felt something strange. Eagles should not fly in flocks. Their constant appearances clearly revealed the magic of the voodoo witch. It is hard to believe that in such a small village there are immediately 3 voodoo witches hiding, but they must leave immediately. When Grem and Ruru successfully caught the bird used for observation, Ruru got scared she could kill them and thus anger Ferme, and Almaz replied that since the company sent their spies, they had already become known enemies. Count in the royal palace begged for immediate help. Just as the Earl returned to announce that reinforcements would arrive in 3 days, the company's troops had already set out. They heard about the fall of Rosie. Movements were noticed around from neighboring countries and from several clans. The Earl read a letter from Raymond to his son. The enemy sought to divide and sow chaos in the capital, so Raymond asked Almaz to hold the army for 3 days. King Ferme prepared the troops that were requested and gathered 3,200 soldiers near him. 200 would go to the village, so if possible they would march to the capital or at least distract the enemy's attention, and the king himself decided to lead 3,000 in a frontal assault on the capital. The army anxiously thought that mobilizing 32,000 warriors would exhaust all forces while the enemy could gather up to 15,000. The king asked if he should worry, but he confidently answered that he would not lie. Then the king revealed a strange thing. He made a deal with Regardable to avoid war in exchange for the crown. And this means that the second largest power in Modal will not get involved in the fight. But the king doubts whether Rieger will betray them. Perhaps he only wants to gain the trust and gratitude of the people of Rhesus. However, the king thinks it will be easy to deal with Rieger, especially since he is trying to sign an alliance with 2 neighboring countries. According to sources, they have already sent troops to the border, waiting for the agreement. Therefore, the king is forced to divide his troops to guard against surprises. The decisive refusal to participate and the expulsion of the troops make him think that there are probably only 4,000 people left in the capital. When the people heard the news, they stood up and said, "If this is true, the difference is only 1,000 soldiers. The king will definitely win," and everyone excitedly discusses how a toast for victory will be prepared in the Rose Palace. Immediately after this, Almaz saw 200 soldiers set out from the watchtower towards the village, just as had been reported earlier. The villagers were bustling and did not know what to do next. Someone suggested that Ruru transform into an eagle and attack them, but Almaz stopped the panic, calmed everyone, and reminded them that they were protected by the fortress and emotions, so he advised to stay calm and stick to the plan. Almaz realized that among those approaching there was no royal retinue. The leader could have been just a commander. The leader demanded that Almaz open the gates and give up all their food. After Almaz refused, the enemy forces immediately launched an attack. At first, part of the enemy fell into a trap set by the village, but no one else was caught. Then a continuous hail of arrows prevented the villagers from effectively counterattacking, and Graham's shooting position was also revealed and he was relentlessly attacked. They threw stones at the enemy's shield, but the shield deflected the blows and saved them from danger, so the villagers found themselves in a difficult situation. Many villagers were wounded, and Almas ordered the wounded to be taken to a safe place. On kept throwing stones at them without stopping. Soyeon realized that the village attack was futile and the enemy freely shot arrows. 2 days had passed since King Roses fell ill. Chaos reigned in the castle and there was no good news, and Soyeon, after reading Raymond's letter in anger, cursed him as an unfortunate loser who sent no soldiers and hid his troops in his native lands. Raymond felt he could use this opportunity for his political benefit, and later realized another thing: this was a chance for them too. If they carried this out without his support, his position would definitely be shaken. Then a soldier ran in with news from Almas. Somehow Almas turned the tide of events. Not only did he defeat the royal army that took a short path through the forest, but also captured the enemy general. No one died in the village, although there were wounded on the enemy side. Total losses amounted to 180 people. Raymond was so shocked by the news that he repeatedly asked the soldier to repeat it. He only sometimes hoped that his son would buy it, but he could never imagine such success. Almas was called to report on the situation, and Raymond told his son that they now had only 3,000 soldiers, almost as many as the enemy. Regardless of how steadfast he was a military genius. If the troops were equal, they might not have won. Almas decided that this company would not enter battle unless confident of victory. Raymond decided to appoint his son by the commander's order to defeat King Ferme. 2 years had already passed. He took Almas to himself, who had learned a lot about military tactics. Raymond announced that he would appoint Bartholomew and Burroughs as commanders to accompany Almas. On the battlefield, they would make decisions together. Raymond did not want his inexperienced son to decide everything alone. He laughed and added that he was not foolish enough to let his young son make decisions that would affect the country. Almas received news that several friends from his village also wanted him to join Raymond's smiles. He said that security for Almas was not a problem, and Raymond would stay here and give orders from here. There, Almas immediately prepared himself and his troops before departure. Raymond ordered his son not to die there. On the way to him, he was traveling alongside Almas. Almas constantly asked if his feet were cold, and Almas seriously told him to stop joking. He was really worried. He persuaded Almas to let him take command and ordered him to relax and rest. Almas threw his legs over the horse's saddle. Bartella whispered to Almas that all the soldiers were worried, not just him, and they wondered why Griffin's son was still young and not strong. Then Almas's troops and his detachment went each their own way. Almas told Bartholomew that he might no longer be able to command, but he could still fight, so he wanted to be in the front row. Bartolo scolded him, reminding him of Raymond's words, "Do not expose the son to danger," and Alma replied that he understood his father's temper, but this time asked for permission. After some thought, Bartolo agreed. He decided that Almas had enough strength to defeat the enemy and capture Tetra with one strike of a short spear and a successful approach. Almas's hand urged him not to do foolish things. Soyeon stepped forward and reported that he had seen the enemy. They were still an hour away from Bartholomew. Praise him, confirmed that he is truly a skilled wizard, and Almas is now becoming great by becoming Raymond's adopted son. Next to him stand a mighty wizard and a brave warrior, who seem to ask not to consider this a natural gift. Look at the sky and emphasize how hard their work and training have been. And Bartholomew says that today's battle is inevitable and gently asks everyone to take care of their own safety, because the company's forces are already approaching. Almas looked with surprise at their advanced equipment. Bartolo calmly explained that in their company it is customary to keep warriors in constant tension between the threat of battle and hunger. Almas worries that this method might work, but it is difficult to implement. Tetra notes that both sides have cavalry, but the enemy has much more, especially compared to the attack on the village. Almas convinced everyone to agree that the previous attack on the village brought them new warriors who now pressure him, forcing him to give combat orders. Almas shouted at the top of his lungs for everyone to line up as agreed. Tetra is confused and asks what plan is being referred to. Almas calmly replies that there is no plan, he just shouted to play the role of a commander. Bartholomew laughs, thinking that Almas knows the plan he himself made 2 years ago. He insists that everyone show what they have achieved in 2 years of training. The enemy quickly masters the formation. Almas, the king of the company, felt uneasy due to the concentration of forces on his right flank. It seemed Rosewood intended to directly attack the elite units on that wing. He laughed and found his strategy interesting. They say that if this is all they have, then against a trickster like him, it is unlikely that new tactics will succeed. The right flank is simply weaker than the other positions. It seems vulnerable from the outside, but breaking through there is not easy, and they say in a quiet, confident whisper that this time they will definitely win. The battle between the armies officially begins. Rhea leads the assault, and the cavalry, despising her as just a girl, laughs. One asks if she wants to be beaten, and another steps forward to confront Rhea and stop her onslaught. The faithful Rosewood goes behind, warning Rhea, "Be careful." He decisively tells her to fall back and hand over the front line to him. Soon the enemies realized. Rosewood is incredibly powerful. One of them shouted that it was true. She was too strong and they would not withstand Rhea and Rosewood. Almas watched from the side and continuously praised their efforts, noting that at this level everything was going smoothly and they easily controlled the enemy cavalry, and those loyal to Rosewood, loyal to Almas, became physically even stronger. Almas was confident. Only the two of them could hold the situation on the left flank. A soldier ran in and reported that enemy infantry was approaching, and Almas ordered to deploy explosive spears filled with black powder and magical paper to deliver a powerful strike. After they were used to defend the village, only 10 remained. Let this be the first secret weapon used, and although there were few, they definitely sowed confusion among King Ferme's enemies. King Ferme looked confused at the endless explosions and soldiers jumping into the air, and could not comprehend what kind of weapon Almas possessed, while the opposite side only built guesses which, unfortunately, held only thanks to the strong frontline fighters. The first order was to continue holding the front. No one really understood these strange events, but everyone was sure that their formation was not so easy to break. The assault company was determined to win and ordered to divide forces to surround Almas's troops from both sides. Almas believed that with the encirclement they would defeat Almas's army, regardless of the strength of his left wing, and then he finally realized what a terrible situation it was. He grimly declared that he would not allow them to surround and take his shield, stepped towards them and again insisted that he would not allow it. The company immediately recognized him as the leader, Almas, and the peasants shouted in chorus that he was truly the son of Griffin and adopted by Raymond, the protector of the Tetra and his fiancée. Almas continued to shout loudly that he too was the supreme commander of the army. Knowing that this would attract the enemy's attention, King Ferme ordered his men to kill Almas, believing that this way they would achieve victory, and Almas loudly shouted that no one would dare approach him because he had the power granted by the emperor, and he was not so easy to defeat. This successfully distracted the enemy's attention, so Ray and Rosewood managed to quietly deal with their cavalry. When the squad realized this, it was already too late. Almas directly intervened in the skirmish and pushed for battle. The unexpected strike successfully stopped Ferme's attack. Ferme noticed what a horror it was, but said that if Almas could not fight on the battlefield at that moment, it would not matter. Almas rushed into an aggressive attack on Ferme, defiantly asking, did Almas really think that it was possible to win only with this power? Almas said that if he struck with full force, the spear would break, so he restrained himself. If it was Bartolo's strike, the company would fall. He realized that against such a powerful spear a different tactic was needed, and when he changed the spear, the shield proved useless. The company's movements were still readable like open cards. Almas decided to stay on the defense and wait for an opportunity to attack. The company caught Almas off guard again. They admitted that they had long been watching Almas's fighting style and noticed his skills were not perfect, but there was one strong point. The king sincerely said that Almas had no chance of victory. Almas acknowledged the situation described by the company, but a thought flashed in his mind that could turn the tide of the powerful attack. They asked why Almas froze during that battle. A sudden attack caught him by surprise and forced Almas to give all his strength. With one powerful strike, he shattered their spear and told Almas to find a new weapon. Almas asked if they were really sure and warned that the company might regret it if they had to fight one-on-one. Ferme did not want to win. The victory they wanted had to be fair. Encouraging his soldiers, Almas gracefully threw his sword from afar. He decided not to use it because he realized that his company had a clear advantage in battle thanks to his excellent techniques and sharp eye with the spear. But Almas was confident that the company did not suspect his skill with the sword. This could be his chance to turn the tide of the battle, to challenge the royal retinue and force them to notice the noticeable difference in length between the sword and the sturdy spear. Almas tried to keep a safe distance, but the spear instantly closed the gap between them with incredible speed. Almas explained amicably that he used kendo steps footwork techniques that are difficult to perform on the ground. Although he firmly said it was impossible to understand, Ferme's company still tried to create distance, shielding themselves with their shields. Almas knew that in command and strategy he might not shine, but his strength was enough to prevent the company from throwing all its might, breaking through his defense and easily defeating Ferme. Even before the dying company informed Almas that he had to take responsibility for his murder. He dreamed of uniting half the island and asked Almas to continue his work. The company wanted Almas to become a great king who would be remembered in history, and for the first to fall by Almas's hand to be himself. Finally, he asked Almas to take care of the happiness of the only person he ever had. The forgiving company still managed to say a lot of words before death, but if Almas wanted to remain in history, he would have acknowledged him as a genius, a man next to whom even Griffin was afraid to be, and everyone began to celebrate the commander's victory over King Ferme. Almas shouted to bring everyone back to the battle that was ongoing on the field, and Ron tightly gripped his sword and declared that the enemy leader was defeated. The news reported the destruction of the enemy's right flank and showed where they fled. Bartolo laughed, praising Almas's genius. The young captain ordered his men to clear the battlefield, and the defeated troops were annihilated. The last soldiers of the enemy kingdom threw all their forces into the fight, leaving the helpless capital, and Almas's troops entered the capital without resistance and captured the royal farm castle without shedding a single drop of blood. After the incident, Bartolo was still euphoric, praising incredible moves and attacks, even uncorking a bottle of wine in honor of their victorious action. Everyone felt relief and safety, and then Bartolo jokingly said how quickly he did it, taking wine from his original castle, which belonged to Lagos and was considered the result of reconquest, and today added that they fulfilled Lagos's last wish. Almas fixed his gaze on his native land, while peasants approached. He rushed into Tetra's arms, sighing with relief because wherever Almas went no one from their village died. People joyfully chanted. Ruru noticed that it seemed as if the whole country was celebrating the happiness of its people. Almas, writing to Tetra, insisted that he acknowledge the people's opinion. No one expected that the one who brought victory to the homeland would himself bring the enemy's head. Bartholomew shouted to the crowd, asking if Almas gave more than they hoped. Next, it was necessary to decide what to do with the territory, and it depended on who would become the next leader, so as not to let the seeds of rebellion, desired by the people, grow. Almas inherited the company's lands, which originally belonged to the Lagos-Esh family. Within a month, the company's inhabitants came under the rule of the Roses Empire, and King Roses recovered without complications. Everything went smoothly, and the day of Almas and Tetra's wedding came. The ceremony was blessed by all, and in the concluding part, sincere blessings flowed from various families. A soldier brought a gift and announced that one family could not come. Almas recognized in it the gift of the Dable family. They really were not at the wedding. The Dables were against the annexation of the company's territory, but this gift for Almas and Tetra clearly showed. Although they protested against the unpleasant annexation, they had no objections to the wedding itself. After that, people wondered what position the Dibble family would take. Tetra checked all the gifts requested for Almas and wondered if she wanted to join the celebration. Almas refused, saying that he preferred to sit here next to her and watch the people below. He thoughtfully ran through in his mind their path from the Romalia forest and felt gratitude to everyone for their contribution to their success. King Rose was furious and sharply scolded his brother Raymond for what he had done during his unconsciousness, and Raymond defended himself, saying that he had taken on the burden of ruling while the king was absent. Although the king showed his displeasure, he acknowledged that Almas had become a hero and believed that the Ash family would be stable if Almas led it. He ordered Raymond to announce that their wedding should be prepared in another place. Sechme happily arrived at the bustling trading city of Claris. The gatekeeper smiled and said that entry to the city was free, only merchants paid, but if Seimei planned to stay more than a month, he would have to pay taxes. The friendly gatekeeper warned Seimei about two types of people in the city, explained who pays taxes and who is better not to listen to and keep away from. At the city entrance, Seimei accidentally helped a girl named Ismia who was wildly passionate about architecture. Together they caught a thief. A relationship developed between them. They found a restaurant to talk, and he told about his dream to reach the edge of the ocean and fulfill his parents' dream, and their goal was not far from the trading city. Isma asked to join Seimei and explained that the city was also full of architects. She, as a woman, saw no opportunity there. She wanted to show her talent in a backward corner similar to their destination and believed that when King Rose Seish was unconscious, she would have more chances to prove herself. Raymond convened a council to decide the fate of the family territory's ashes, proposed to transfer power to Almas's son, and everyone agreed that entrusting this to Almas was a wise decision. Despite all his anger, he accused Raymond of abusing power and wondered how he could give such important land to a person of unknown origin. Raymond calmly explained that Almas was defeated by his adopted son, the very one who stood firm on the battlefield, unlike the cowardly Rhaegar, who withdrew the troops to his territory and only watched others fight. Rhaegar sharply asked in response who Almas was before adoption and called him an orphan. Raymond replied, surprised, asking how Almas could be a father if he was Griffin's son, and firmly assured that everything would be fine with him. He would receive support from the military advisor and the council. The role of the peace advisor turned out to be decisive, and all because of the recent battles of Alia. Raymond called for a vote. This drove Rhaegar mad, and he cursed in his heart. Raymond supported the influence of everyone's opinions only because he was the king's brother and sat next to him. He assured Rhaegar to calm down and believe. The king had only 2 years left, and when he died, Raymond would lose influence and the throne would most likely go to Rhaegar, especially since he was engaged to Uriah. Rhaegar then asked if he would support him, to which he replied that he had devoted his life to serving the Diable family, the strongest among the clans. He would probably support the next king, but warned Rhaegar about Almas. He did not consider him a true victory, just a lucky one. He was sure he could do the same and, if necessary, swore to destroy Almas, warning Rhaegar to do so only as a last resort. And with the brother, the King of Roses, any conversation had to be conducted carefully. King did not hide his surprise at Raymond's harsh decision, and a tense scene unfolded. Raymond asked his brother to allow Almas and Uriah to marry as soon as possible, because the king feared that if Rhaegar became the next monarch, a civil war would erupt between Rose's Ash and the Dibble clan, since Almas had a lower status, and at least this way, the king believed, bloodshed could be avoided. Raymond was broken and mourned for his niece Uriah, who would have to marry a man who killed his own wife. After long persuasion, the king agreed to his brother's decision, but on one condition. Almas must sincerely respect and strive to be king and be ready to have blood on his hands from a civil war for the sake of the Almas village community. They were preparing to move to the Ash region, despite how many people were already there, and the new refugees decided to stay in Earl village. And he said, "It is a lie that I do not remember, dear. I will remember and spend the rest of my life paying for Almas's kindness." He said it would be so, was glad she was nearby, but then. All the lush forests of this land were supposed to become their territory, so the count decided to stay in the village and take care of Almas, looking after those silent people. He said with surprise that all the refugees had decided so, and as he thought everything remained the same, they would return. But their native Tetra was not surprised. This only confirmed that living in the village of Almas was more comfortable than in any other country. Almas smiled and said that this is not only his duty but everyone's business. He was the first to ask what to do in his position, and Burroughs took a stance following the advisor's advice, explaining without officialdom that it is important to maintain order, protect the territory, and prevent voodoo magic. He added that Almas would also have to sort out all those collections and taxes they have to pay to King Rose. Almas secretly grumbled that there was too much work. But Bartolo calmed him down. This job can be handled. He even gave examples of fair assessments that take culture into account. Almas will not be alone. Burroughs and Bartolo will stand nearby. Bartolo promises to watch over peace and order. Burroughs will handle legal issues and decisions, and Almas himself will eventually be able to change who is responsible for what if he wishes. Bartolo informed Almas that his next task was to revive the kingdom under his young rule, and although Almas admitted that it would be difficult, he understood that he must fulfill his duty. Money was needed for everything, and raising taxes seemed the only way out, but Almas interrupted and asked if there had ever been a taxation system in the country at all. Since he suspected that tax experts probably manipulated incomes or at least influenced personal wealth. So half the country also decided that the first step should be a population census to accurately determine the size of taxes and minimize possible losses. Almas prepared a paper questionnaire for surveying the population. They needed to record important things: age, gender, and material status of each person in the district. They moved on and noticed that there were almost no prepared people in the country, only Tetra and fewer than 10 others. Almas realized that due to illiteracy, a population census had not been conducted before, and therefore tax collection had become a big problem. Almas ordered them to use a simple form where only numbers that people consider even should be written. For those who cannot read and write, writing numbers was extremely simple. Tetra asked if they would have to do all this manually since it would be colossal work, to which Almas smiled and replied that they would not do it that way. Instead, they resort to printing with wooden stamps, as if making giant stamps. They only need to carve signs on wooden blocks, apply paint, and press onto paper. Ron and Rosewood both agreed this method really works, but the problem is with taxes. The company considers the Ash region a remote zone, and Almaz is sure that they can only take a low tax. They decided to take 10 of the harvest as a tax on land and labor, and the personal income tax was abolished. Burroughs stood nearby and exclaimed that it is a bold step to introduce personal taxes, because although they give the state a stable income, they burden the citizens. Instead, we could forcibly collect huge land taxes from the owners, but nothing good will come from force. He wants the focus to be on citizens ready to take risks and reap the rewards. Bartholomew agreed to revive the land, but reminded him that reviving the nation also requires money. Almas wants to massively distribute his tools, even rice threshers, but because of this many farmers may be left without work. Although he will give them subsidies, he will simultaneously increase profits from industrial paper production, which will also create more jobs. Unfortunately, the development of other sectors had to be postponed, including the introduction of crop rotation for rice. But as soon as he mentioned alcohol, Almaz's eyes lit up. He was the first to try the drink from Almaz. Almaz explained that making alcohol requires a lot of special equipment, and they only have one so far, so they will have to find a skilled blacksmith to make more. Blacksmiths here are masters with iron, but a few know how to work with copper. Almaz smiled and said that copper would do. He paused and added that it remains to find buyers and investors, but he has a solution. Financial problems can be set aside. He intends to lower taxes, for which everyone laughed in surprise. Almaz announced that now that all issues are resolved, they move on to military affairs and started the last topic of the day: military. He admitted that he knows little about this matter. He is only a nominal commander. He called Bartholomew, consulted, and jokingly added that he had a little drink. It's time to get to work, and Bartholomew laughed, promising to present it. For the first time since Almaz became the leader of this country, he felt the responsibility and calling to protect the land and people, to drive out criminals from their territories and prevent external invaders, and they begin to realize the need for a strong army, albeit smaller in size, like in their village. They need weapons, but above all, soldiers. Ron asked what they would do about this, and Almaz insisted. First, they need to assess the current situation. There is no regular army there, except for the current people, almost no real fighters. In the village, maybe a few dozen who know how to fight, and the sharpest threat is the neighboring kingdom of Demorgar. King Roses expects Ash to become a shield against Will, to become Morsar, so Almaz inquired about the current military strength of the kingdom. Bartholomew thought a little and said they have about 50,000 soldiers, but due to stretched possessions and numerous enemies, you cannot throw all the force at once. Only about 1,020,000 will go into battle. Tetra noted that in the battle with Ferme they had 3,000 soldiers without problems, and Bartolo said that people can still be recruited in the future, so the forces may be enough, especially if the general announces mobilization in case of war. Bartolo reassured, don't worry, the army will be well trained, as often happens here during war, but he says if war breaks out suddenly, that's a completely different matter. In his opinion, it is best to have a standing army, which King Ferme does not have, and about 300 soldiers is a waste. He asked what Almaz thinks about the soldiers who, after the death of their king, were left without work and without a path. Almaz believes that he must become a target of revenge for them. He killed their king, but ignoring them could later cause unrest. Several sensible people decided to use useless advice as a weapon. Unfortunately, he wants to first raise more funds before further discussion, so he orders everyone to replenish gunpowder supplies. It is difficult to produce, and it will be too late to start making it only when it is needed. Almaz suggests firmly fortifying everything possible: finances and the magic circle. Tetra, hearing this, says she will take on the necessary circle and soon begin preparing everything. And after a few days, Almaz with 3 companions sets off to the bustling trading city of Claris, where it is much livelier than in Roses. Their first goal is to find a protector for wine and paper products, the second to secure funds for the country's reconstruction, and Ron asks confusedly whether earning money and receiving it are not the same thing, but he is told that the profit from selling paper and distilling wine will not be enough, so they plan to borrow a large sum that Grem has nearby, which raises concerns about the strategy itself. Almaz convinces him that they can pay and they have more capital to enter a bigger business. Grem wonders why they then do not borrow from the King of Roses. Almaz explains that the Kingdom of Roses has not yet recovered from economic problems, and few can afford luxury items like paper or wine. Almaz told them not to worry about negotiations. The King of Roses introduced them to a merchant in Claris, so now their task is to negotiate with him and just hope he does not try to take advantage of them. As soon as they approached the merchant, they immediately got down to business and asked to see what he sells, while Almas took out fine paper and simply explained that it is very convenient for recording practical information, as an alternative to papyrus or parchment. Aints was interested and asked if it was possible to write on it, and Almas smiled and handed over all the paper samples so he could use them. He sees that compared to papyrus, this can be sold for twice the price, but to quickly recoup the invested money, he wonders if Almas can increase production and sell at the same price as papyrus. Almas understands it will cover only part of the market, but a lot can be earned on wine. After tasting it, Aints enthusiastically notes its strength and says he has never tried anything like it before. He suggests selling it at 20 times the usual price. But Almas responds with a counteroffer at least 30 times higher, and this is stunning. Aints easily agreed with an understanding smile. He himself did not fully understand it, but knew that getting out of debt is difficult. The experienced merchant put on the table a paper with calculations how much money the residents of Popol can earn now. Almas wanted to borrow 3 times more than indicated there. Aints offered a simple condition. If Almas agrees to lower the price of paper until the debt is fully repaid, he will give the loan, and Almas agreed. They know that Z believes in it as long as he can earn a little by selling paper. Although the debt is paid slowly, extra money will still come. A few weeks passed after that, and Almas was already the lord of the Ashen Land, controlled by Ron and Soyan, collecting taxes from the people. The village head hands over 4 large sacks and says these are this year's taxes. Ron asks the elder to wait because he wants to check a strange amount. The elder asks why he is being checked, saying he has never experienced this before. The tax should be 10 of the income, but the sacks seem too small for his land. Soyan reports that after inspection, at least 10 more such missing sacks were found. Ron angrily rushes to the village head demanding explanations for this discrepancy, and the village head laughs and insists he gave everything. Ron, enraged, orders the elder to be arrested because he refuses to admit his guilt. Although he was already arrested, the elder does not back down and insists that Ron prove his guilt. Statistical reports show the harvests named by the elder are too small and no one reported crop failures. Soyan finds a secret cellar under the elder's house filled with hidden wheat. Ron directly accuses him of this. He was accused of embezzlement, a serious crime. The village elder defended himself. Collecting taxes is a risky business, and he only took a small portion for himself. He praised Ron for his kindness and offered him a share to keep silent. Nearby, Soyan also accused the elder of bribery. The sentence was 70 lashes. The elder begged desperately. Mercy. Ron fiercely ordered him to do it, and he begged for mercy even from God himself. We returned to Ash Castle. Ron and Soyan met Earl, who had just arrived, and told him about the meeting with the nobleman who tried to bribe them. They complained with irritation. This was already the 12th time, and unfortunately they had to acknowledge the hard work of Ron and the Soyans. Although they collected only 10 of the successful grain, which, considering the census of people across the region, was still a considerable amount. Now enough taxes could be collected to support the government and the country. Finally, taxes on farmers began to look more logical than before, and the initiative with unified equipment was going very well. Burroughs said that they managed to buy quality steel with borrowed money, so they can start manufacturing rice threshers, which they will sell or rent to those who need them. Thanks to advanced tools, farmers could finally revive barren land and the harvests sharply increased. After finishing the report, Burroughs reminded Almas that the harvest festival was approaching, a great holiday in Rossi's, where the nobility gathered, and of course, it interested him. Almas acknowledged the event, emphasized that it was better to avoid any clashes, but everyone still needed to prepare well, while Ron Rosewood was appointed to announce the military draft across the country. The announcement caused anxiety among the people. Some feared that war would soon begin, others protested because they had more work in the fields. They simply said enlistment is voluntary only, no one is forced, and they only took boys from 15 to 30 years old. They paid with grain, God would provide weapons, no need to buy. Their main task was to guard the house of God and prevent crimes. The recruits lived in a house near the fortress and trained the army daily. An early release was only granted in case of injury or serious illness, although eventually they were given deserved rest. Rosewood added that those interested should notify the village elder within 2 weeks, and if there were more volunteers than places, 300 people would be selected through a competition. Peasants asked if they could avoid registering, and Rosewood firmly replied that no one would be forced for those busy in the fields. This was a real relief. Another in the crowd, a former elite royal guard, asked if he would be accepted if he signed up, and Rosewood firmly said they would take everyone with skills and desire. He loudly announced to the entire gathering that regardless of status, everyone who wants to join is welcome. There were more applications than expected, and Almaz was pleasantly surprised. Most of the company's soldiers were conscripts from the village, and upon returning home after service, they often found their fields occupied. So without work, this recruitment became a bitter consolation for those afraid not to get on the registers. Those without registration risked turning to crime. Ron, anxious, doubted whether they had enough resources to support more soldiers, especially since the peasants had just been freed from taxes, and the soldiers were left without work. Ron, a soldier, asked again if everything would be all right, and Almaz, smiling, praised him for thinking not only about work but also about the economy, assured everyone that although they were not economically rich, it was not so bad, and asked Ron if he knew why the company's government economy was so poor if it relied only on agricultural income. Unfortunately, they did not diversify income sources. Everything depended on the sale of wine, paper, and taxes, and was arranged in a soldierly manner, so chaos prevailed. Everyone began choosing their commanders, and he approached Rosewood to appoint him cavalry commander and to manage the slaves they were to transfer. But Rosewood initially refused, wondering why they chose him and not the more experienced Burroughs. Almaz explained that Burroughs had never commanded cavalry, and since Rosewood was of humble origin, he was the best rider. Almaz knew that he had good relations with Rhea, so Rosewood was perfect for this task. Jokingly, Almaz nudged Rosewood to take the opportunity to marry Rhea so he could communicate with her more intimately. Almaz decided that Ron would be responsible for infantry and Grem for archers. Rosewood accepted the role and promised to do his best. In a few days, when Tetra would deliver the 100 horses she ordered, he was pleased to see those dismounting were impressed by the splendor of their armor and said it was an honor for them to meet again. However, they did not expect the armor to appear personally later. Rosewood began counting his horses and handed them over to the slaves. They were told that they were carefully selected as war slaves for their qualities. Almaz asked Rhea to translate for the slaves who greeted them, and proclaimed himself their new master. One of the slaves heard this and loudly demanded food. Rhea was surprised by his boldness, but Almaz did not move and ordered Tetra to prepare food, adding that the slaves would be given the opportunity to wash once and tidy themselves up. When the preparation was completed, Rosewood announced that he was their leader and that they were being sent to fight in the cavalry, assuring that if they performed well, it could lead to their freedom. The rebellious slaves from the previous step, although agreeing to work hard, persistently demanded a meeting with the one who could truly grant them freedom. Rose agreed if Verger defeated him in battle, he would gain freedom. If not, he would have to obey Rhea. Rosewood immediately told Almaz what had happened, and everyone gathered to watch the duel. Rosewood won easily, captivating the audience with his lightning-fast and flawless combat skills. It was obvious that Aints noticed how Rosewood dodged the opponent's attack and immediately went on the counterattack. Ain realized ordinary people are not capable of such actions and thought that Rosewood's balance was maintained thanks to his agility and those extraordinary powers given to him by the Emperor's blessing. In the Ashen Palace, Almaz and Tetra joyfully welcomed them when they returned. Almaz reassured that Rosewood was fine with cavalry training. He said that both the military and political situations were calm, so all that remained was to wait for the festival day, and Soyan reported that a young couple had come to Almaz requesting an audience, but without any documents. Almaz, now a lord, was wary of strangers. They could be dangerous, so he suggested sending the visitors away, although he himself found them interesting and thought it was worth meeting them. Interested, Almaz asked why, and Soyan explained that the woman was an architect, the man was a researcher from the Crimson Empire, and she wanted to work as an architect. Almaz realized that they currently lacked such talent and agreed that they needed to meet them. The man, who called himself a traveler of the world, enthusiastically claimed that he had visited all continents. Almaz invited him to the office for a meeting, and the architect, introducing himself, immediately unfolded sketches. He said he could design any structure, showed drawings of houses, bridges, and even siege engines, catapults, and ballistae, and Almaz, not hiding his surprise, asked why they had chosen his small country to showcase his talent. The architect honestly admitted that he preferred to build a career in a small company in a small kingdom rather than be a mere rank-and-file in a large one, and Almaz understood. Instead of hiring him immediately, he wanted to meet first. Impressed by his skills, he entrusted him with a promising task of arrangement as an official job depending on the results, and the architect, grateful for the chance, promised not to let him down. Then he named himself Saimi and with a mysterious smile explained that he came from a distant Western empire known as the Silk Land. He had just finished searching for the end of the world and wanted to describe his journey in a book. But classical materials such as sheepskin and papyrus turned out to be too expensive for him, so he came across paper from the kingdom of Almas and considered it the best material for his book. Almas felt a chance to make a name for himself and agreed to provide the paper on one condition: that he would be the first to see Almas's finished book. Setting off according to plan to the capital Roses to participate in the harvest festival, Almas looked around with interest and asked if this was really the star of the Almas festival, and after surveying the place, noted that it was even more crowded here than at their last wedding. Raman stood by the gates warmly greeting his son and noting that they had not seen each other for a long time. Almas pointed to a large barrel and said he had brought festive wine. Before leaving, he warned his father not to drink too much. Raymond's wine was quite strong, assuring that he would warn others. Raymond, having agreed to talk with his son later, led them to the main family gathering place. Quickly leaving Tetra, Raymond looked around the crowd with interest, wondering if influential families gathered here. They noticed several people who had been at their wedding. Almas smiled and told Tetra that their task now was to gain more allies, so they needed to be friendly. Tetra added that they should stay away from a man named Regar because their territories bordered each other, but there was no reason to start a conflict. Almas brought 2 drinks and, holding them in his hands, smiled and asked Tetra which one he wanted. Tetra noticed that there were many children with their parents at the party, and then Almas approached him again to ask which drink he would choose first. Almas asked confusedly what he meant when he said that children want a boy or a girl first, asked again why he suddenly said that, and Tetra replied that he did not care if a girl came first and then a boy. He thought that a boy would grow up to be a warrior faster, so it was better to have a boy first, and Almas laughed, saying that if Tetra thought so, he did not mind. He gestured to make it clear that if the boy was first, the next should be a girl. Tetra asked Almas what his plans were next, and he, smiling, asked if he planned to have many children. He himself was not sure, but as long as the gender balance was not too skewed, it did not matter to him. Almas suggested postponing this topic for later. They were still at the party, so they first decided to look for something to eat. At that moment, a group of people approached Almas and, recalling the last words of King Ferme, a request to make him happy, asked him to tell about his fight with the king. Almas thought about it for a long time. The message was heavy, but he still wanted Tetra's happiness. Almas confirmed his love for Tetra, knowing that Tetra would never change his girl. The crowd asked if Almas still did not have that necessary aura. Other girls picked up, saying it was better for someone else to take care of him, and Almas suddenly realized the girls around dreamed of becoming his second wife. The crowd closed in around him, and he found himself pushed to the very edge. Tetra pulled Almas out. She said she wanted to introduce him to a dish that was not found in their land. Almas sighed with relief, breaking free from the constant noise, and kept thanking his wife. Tetra looked at Almas and said that if he wanted to marry again, she would not stand in his way, but he had to make sure that it did not destroy the happiness of their family. Almas replied because he knew he could always joke about anything. While they were still talking, Regar approached Tetra from the side, and she was the first to notice him. He quietly whispered about his arrogance, wondering why he had brought so many servants with him, and almost warned that the man was stern. When he came up to them, everyone laughed loudly, delighted to meet Almas and Tetra and sincerely congratulating them on their marriage. Almas shook Regar's hand again and thought he was friendlier than expected. Regar apologized for not being at their wedding, saying he rarely got sick, but unfortunately on that special day she fell ill. She held Almas's hand tightly, and in that smile her regret was felt. Secretly twisted a finger as a sign, "Take care of your health." Regar groans in pain. Let go and began loudly cursing Almas, attracting the attention of many of his subordinates. As he walked away, Almas advised Ron not to fall for provocations and to be careful because when they are nearby, it is easy to surround them. Yuria then greeted Almas and Tetra, glancing across the room where Regar was flirting with several girls. Almas thought it was because the people from Griffin's shelter were exactly those he wanted to spend the most time with. He wanted to see him happy like Tetra, although he himself was drawn to Yuria, but Yuria already had a fiancé and was going to get married. Before leaving, Yuria quietly slipped a piece of paper into his hand and asked to meet. Opal approached Almas and asked to tell about your fight with King Ferme, recalling the last words of King Ferme to Almas about making him happy. Almas thought about it for a long time. The message was heavy, but he also wanted Tetra's happiness and confirmed his love for her, knowing that Tetra would never change the girl. Tetra froze for a moment, then sat opposite Almas and quietly said that she was his wife. As a wife, she had less power than the husband, the head of the family, and could not contradict his final decision. Almas asked Tetra to share her true feelings. He did not want to force his wife to open up. Tetra said she loved Alma's a man who always knew how to make wise decisions and believed that under his leadership everything would be fine. She understood that people are sometimes not very decisive, that is normal, but she did not want him to give his decisions to someone else. Tetra insisted that Almas must decide about Yuria himself and not worry too much about her. In the Romelian forest, Almas decided to set out in search of Griffin. He told Griffin everything that had happened to him, and soon Griffin understood Almas wants to marry Yuria. But Yuria was the boss's daughter, and that meant that marrying her would make Almas a newcomer in the group, and many would challenge his leadership weakly, which could escalate into war. Almas agreed, but turned to Griffin, carefully choosing his words. Griffin did not care, and he asked if Almas would listen to his advice. Almas said directly that he came not to decide, but to ask for advice. Griffin said that if Almas wants to marry Yuria, then let him marry. Almas warned with anxiety. This could ignite a war that would harm them. Griffin said whether they help Almas or not depends only on them. And Almas did not need to worry. Griffin did not understand why he was so worried about quarrels in the group and asked if it was necessary to win. Almas firmly said that he must win. Considering Griffin's previous words, he killed without remorse. Griffin, who was listening, he admitted that he said those words to people who were a pack. Some killed without pity, and they could neither protect him nor live alongside such in the pack. Griffin told Almas that he was different because he followed rules that he himself did not follow in the pack. He is the only one who can influence them and stands outside the herd's rules, so it does not matter whether Almas belongs to the herd. Griffin says it is better that he, though not one of them, can still protect them now that Almas has become the ruler. He must fulfill his duty to the herd and not lose sight of what is more important than trifles. Griffin sternly warns, listen carefully. If something impossible tries to break into this world, then it simply cannot happen, and when a lion becomes the leader, he destroys the descendants of the previous leader. If Almas hesitates with the choice, he will regret it, but the greatest regret will be that he did not make the decision himself or gave it to Griffin. It is better for him to decide quickly to accept it or reject it. Almas understands that he will also have to regret his choice because both options are bad. He thanks Griffin for thinking everything through well. Griffin understands that Almas has already made his decision. In the kingdom of the King of Roses, he asked Almas with tension in his voice, has he already made a decision? But first, Almas sincerely thanks him for considering his decision. He knows well that asking like this is shameful. But Yuria asks for her hand, and his country turns its gaze to her. He asks if she agrees to become his wife. Raymond laughed. He realized that he had almost decided faster than he himself thought. Everyone was already waiting for it to happen again next week, and he was even going to persuade her if it dragged on, so everyone accepted his quick decision with relief. Embarrassed, Yuria asked the king if he had given him only 3 days or if he was not that king. The king, surprised, could not believe that it would be decided in 3 days and said that then he could not make such an important decision because he even had plans for a month, although he knew he would not survive then. Almas looked at Yuria and called him by name in a gentle voice, and Yuria laughed loudly, thinking that under time pressure he would make a decision faster and not notice the foolish actions of his daughter. King wholeheartedly wanted to thank those who helped Almas make this choice. Someone asked what Almas intended to do when he became king, and he confidently replied that he wanted to unite the Adelina Peninsula. The king only exclaimed what a grand plan it was, looking at the reaction of the people. Almas laughed loudly, saying he was joking, although secretly thinking about the royal dream. All this seemed incredible, and already in the next issue everyone who stood before him announced the marriage and, finally, Almas's ascension to the throne. Almas suggested speeding up the matter and finishing it in 2 days, and the king understood and replied that in 2 days he would not have time to prepare the troops. He inquired whether Almas planned immediately after the coronation to gather an army and send it to destroy all the nobles who did not come to the ceremony. More precisely, Almas wanted to assemble the troops even before the ceremony itself, and the king expressed a desire to abdicate during his lifetime to leave peacefully, and agreed that it was best to do so while he was still alive. But here is the trouble. Almas lacked a significant military victory to ascend the throne, and the king warned that the kingdom of Morar would soon attack them. He decided to transfer command to Almas until the critical time to move and defeat the enemy came, because he was sure that action would have to be taken within the next 3 years, although Almas worried whether the king would live until then, and the king reassured him that he would reveal his knowledge. He was watched over by a voodoo witch and would tell all the details later. Almas had to inform Tetra and keep it a secret. Tetra sat down and listened carefully as Almas and Yuria apologized and explained everything. She laughed, said she understood and was glad to hear it, and then asked Yuria what she was apologizing for. Yuria frankly admitted that she wanted to marry Almas and become his main wife. If he married her, she would eventually become queen, and this would change Tetra's position. Tetra honestly said that she was not upset at all and was not worried about status, because whatever the situation, she would always remain Almas's first wife. Tetra insisted that status did not matter, only love was important, and it was clear that Yuria was more concerned about position. Hearing this, Yuria angrily asked what she meant, because it sounded like Tetra was aiming for the role of Almas's main wife. Almas calmed those present and said that after this both Yuri and Tetra would be able to live as before. He called everyone to the conference hall and ordered Ron to close the doors. Boris said he did not think Almas would summon everyone here. Bartolo laughed and added that it seemed like an important statement was about to be made, and this made everyone tense. And then Almas immediately announced that he would marry Yuria, and Ron asked if this meant he would inherit the throne. Soyeon had been worried about this since he heard that Yuria was marrying Rhaegar, and now this news pleased him. Rosewood, more serious than the others, asked Almas if he had decided to fight DBL. Almas admitted that this was the cause of all their problems, apologized for dragging everyone into such trouble. Grem said it was too late to torment oneself with remorse. Honestly, no one here liked such an attitude. Burroughs greeted him but unfortunately wanted to ask more about Tetra's hearing. Almas instantly embraced Tetra and whispered that she was still his wife. She could not be the main wife, but he would never reject his Almas. He also promised everyone that even becoming king, he would not leave the position of leader of Ash Bartolo. He said he was insanely happy Princess Yura had finally found her prince, but everyone knew this was not just about the D family. But all the other noble families would definitely oppose this. So Almas had to come up with a flawless plan for this moment. Everyone was already informed about his plan to attack King de Morgar in case of invasion, and at least this achievement was supposed to restrain the resistance of the noble families on the border between the lands of Ash and Debel. Gilbert ordered all the peasants to gather. He, a cousin of Lord Dable and ruler of these lands, looked at the recently collected grain tax and accused the village elder of fraud. The elder bowed and insisted that this was all he had asked from the village for a postponement until next year, promising to compensate for this year's shortfall along with payments for the next year. Gilbert drove the old man away, cursing and doubting whether the tribe leader still had money for this year's clothes, and ordered the soldiers to search the storeroom and dig up everything buried in the ground, pointing to their seeds. They found Gilbert and asked the tribe leader what they were doing. The old man burst into tears and explained that it was the village's seed for next year's sowing. If they took it, they would do just that. Gilbert mercilessly offered them seed on the condition that they return it next year with a large interest, looked at the peasants as if asking why they dared to look at him like that, and warned that it was not hard for him to guess their thoughts. Suddenly, he noticed a girl who was not from the village, asked if she had moved from somewhere and if she had paid taxes to that couple, and she fell to her knees, begging for mercy for her husband and swearing to pay everything next month. Then Gilbert said he would forget her taxes on one condition. She must be with him first, promised that after that no one would bother them anymore, and gently led Isma to the border fortress. He quickly realized that the method of building the fortress was about 200 years outdated. Although the builders were very skilled, there were blind spots in the construction. In case of attack, the fortress could be easily captured, many weak points where people bumped into each other during work, and honestly, the place needed a major overhaul. Almas said that better stone than in the Ash country could not be found, so he turned to Tetra and asked if she knew of good mines nearby. If he remembered correctly, the Dibble region gave the best stone in the kingdom, but no one wanted to go there. Tetra replied that this was only because the best stone was there, not because there were no others, and advised to take stone from the Kingdom of Roses. Almas agreed with this proposal, said he would go. Isma said with excitement that she would soon be able to finalize her design. She just needed to add a few edits that would fit the newly completed new version, and when Almas and Tetra returned to the castle, Ron told them about the events. Burroughs reported that refugees from Debel had come to them, and Almas asked how many there were and if there was any news from the D family. Burroughs said there were about 200 people there and no news from D at the moment. Almas asked in surprise how it was possible to lose 200 people without noticing. He needed to know who here knew about it. So Burroughs began listing everyone in the room, even Ron, and some of Ron's soldiers had accidentally come across these refugees while patrolling the border and afterward decided to keep the matter secret. And this meant acting carefully and not worrying that someone would tell Almas. A representative of the refugees pleaded with him to accept them. They came to the Almes region because they could no longer afford to pay rent and land taxes. Those took 30 of their income, and even clothing, fruit, marriage, and almasrum itself were taxed. Almas could not understand these strange taxes. Ron explained that the marriage tax was more like a wedding gift to God, not a payment to the marrying family. The girl continued, saying that relatives of the Dibble family could do anything from theft to murder and no one stopped them. Would Alma say that he understands this and that they can return to their people, Earl, who went to check and confirm the girl's story. Sometimes they were even forced to sell their children. Almes asked Burroughs what he thought about this. Burroughs replied that he had heard many bad stories about House D since the time of Lagos's government. Refugees poured into Almes, and he wondered why the situation was always so bad. Now everyone wants to know what Almas's plan is. He is sure that Rhaegar will not let those who leave his lands go just like that. Almas asked Burroughs if they could pretend they knew nothing, and Burroughs agreed with the idea but warned that in different regions people need permits from both rulers, so if Almas decides to shelter these refugees it will be against the law, he added. However, if Almas wants to protect them knowing their situation, King Roses will consider the case in court and side with him. Although they are ready to support him, they believe there will be no problems, but it is better to keep it secret. Almas decided to settle the refugees in a village deep in the forest, as Rhea had just said. Rhea met more workers and after a few days in the Ashenland hurriedly informed Almas that Rhaegar had arrived. Almas asked if he was already here and how many people he brought. It turned out that Rhaegar brought only a few guards. Almas thought that he arrived earlier than expected and was surprised how much he could know about the refugee situation, so he ordered Soyan to greet Rhaegar warmly and prepare food. They hoped that Rhaegar would become less aggressive after eating and planned to lower their guard as soon as everything was over. Almas, already ready to let Rhaegar in, laughs loudly and thanks him for the hospitality, then slowly begins to eat. He is surprised. Rhaegar is more obedient than expected, and this is a bit confusing. It is unclear whether he is comfortable because of the food or something else, so Almas decides to ask after they eat. He asks about the wind that brought him here, and Rhaegar explains that people really fled from their lands and probably some are seeking refuge in these parts, after which he asks if Almas knows anything about this. They definitely know, but Almas is sure he won't reveal this to anyone except fools. He sincerely apologizes, says he knows nothing, and promises to start an investigation soon. Almas doesn't need to know the truth, but he is confident that he erased all traces of the refugees, and without other evidence no one can make any claims. The one who speaks deliberately says that by the laws of the kingdom, a permit from God is required to move from one territory to another, hoping Almas will understand the hint. But if he finds any refugees, he will immediately turn them in. Almas and Tetra stand upright and watch as a group of Rhaegars leave. They never thought the refugees were their trap, but it turns out they were wrong, so now their task is to wait and see what the next move will be. Rhaegar returned to his lands enraged, scolded everyone on the way, and ordered his subordinates to immediately summon Bernard and Gilbert. Gilbert, although he knew the refugees were from the village under his supervision, was sure they had gone to the Ash region and considered it impossible for them to pass through the Ash zone unnoticed. The journey there would take several days, so they could not have slipped from his attention. When Clyde reported that there was no evidence for trial, Gilbert had no choice but to drop the case. But Rhaegar at least managed to secretly warn them. He says that next time a conflict with Almas arises, they will be able to use it as a pretext and threaten them. A week later, the situation escalates. A large group of refugees from the Dibble region arrives in Ash, and as soon as Gilbert's troops notice this, they send 1,000 soldiers to guard the border, and over 1,000 warriors stand nearby. Ignoring this is impossible. Almas orders to send 700 of his soldiers and 300 reservists to the border, asks Burroughs if he can do it now, and Bartholomew assures that he is always ready to guard with 1,000 combat-ready warriors. Tetra asks Almas if he intends to attack Dibble, and he replies, "Of course not now, only caution and vigilance are needed." The Dibble army crosses the border. Bartholomew laughs and says it will be interesting if this escalates into a fight. As for everyone, it is a great opportunity, perhaps, to kill Rhaegar. Almas says he rarely hears such words from him, but warns, if he starts an unnecessary war, everyone will be even more cautious with him, and this could cause problems with marriage and inheritance in the future. Unfortunately, they say that Bartholomew had to leave earlier, as soon as he arrived, to prepare for any possibilities. When he arrived, he was informed that Bemat advised bringing troops here. Almas calmly explained that he first brought Debel soldiers to the border and assured that he would not fight until they attacked Ash people or crossed the border. After some time, Bartholomew noticed a group of refugees reach the place. It seemed they were on the other side of the fence, and to go further they would have to cross it. But although there were 1,000 of them, half were women and elderly, so it would be difficult for them to swim across the river. Alma's only hoped that nothing bad would happen while cries for help and pleas for mercy echoed around. Hearing Bartholom say that the refugees were already breaking through the barrier was terrible, like a one-sided massacre. Ron loudly shouted to Alma's, begging to save the innocent, especially the children. Alma's said it did not matter what they said. In the end, he could not go there alone. Among many young men who happened to be on the riverbank, he was the one whose wife was taken by Gilbert. A few days ago, when his wife returned, she immediately hanged herself. He no longer had the strength for this. Staying in the village, all memories of his wife turned into nightmares. Now he just ran with others without a certain goal. Around him, old people and children were cruelly killed. He constantly asked Alma's for help, but no one understood that this had nothing to do with them. Then he came up with a plan to attract the attention of Soldier Gilbert. He did not stop shooting arrows, taking advantage of this chance to finally rush to Alma's. At the very moment when he dropped an arrow into the river from the attacker's bench of Gilbert, someone from the Ash tribe who was holding the arrow asked Bartolo if he considered it an accident. He said he did not think so, so it was not an accident. Then he asked if this act could ignite a war. Bartolo replied that no one has the right to shoot the king and that they should declare that they have no hostile intentions. Bartolo looked at the young man who had just died in the river and thought the same himself. Although he did not know his name, he could understand his feelings, and now his goal was achieved and he could rest peacefully with Alma's. Raising the arrow above his head and shouting loudly to get everyone's attention, he announced that the Devil army had just attacked them, and from now on the war begins. The Ash army cried out in despair, calling it unacceptable, and he cursed Gilbert for his stupidity in daring to shoot an arrow into their territory. Seeing the situation worsen, the Devil army tried to flee on Alma's orders, and Bartolo ignored them and first began to protect the refugees. The next day in the Kingdom of Roses, the king could not believe that Alma's was capable of this. He always considered him calmer. Alma's sincerely knelt and apologized, and Raymond nearby said that since then God had abandoned them, although in reality people had already begun to follow Alma's. The king declared that a ruler should not act rashly, and Raymond spoiled his son. In the end, Alma's saved many refugees and regretted nothing. However, he sincerely pitied the king who was judged. Instead of harsher punishment, the king demanded a sacred duel to resolve the matter. In other words, Alma's had to fight to determine who was right and who was guilty. Raymond said that this time his son had enough evidence, and according to the king's verdict, the duel was unnecessary. Alma's could refuse. But that would damage his honor. People would call him a coward or say he was a liar. He was sure he invented this move himself and wanted to clear his name after the defeat, so he asked if he would agree to it. But there were no guarantees of victory, and Raymond told his son that although he was a foolish Rhaegar, he was the strongest man in the kingdom and stronger than everyone. That is why he conceived this duel. Alma's recalled their arm wrestling at the party. Although he won, he had to admit that Rhaegar was stronger, and he began to wonder if he really had some blessing. Yuria found out about this and also understood the situation. She told him that yes, Rhaegar really has a blessing, which turned out to be similar to Alma's, and when Alma's asked if it often happens that many people have the same gift, Yuria replied that in her opinion very rarely does anyone have royal permission for this. She recalled that her gift was also similar to Rhaegar's, which, according to the king, was a real wonder. The king did not want to rely on an uncertain power, but if Alma's was confident he could defeat Belmont, he was ready to accept the duel, and if Alma's wins, he will finally destroy the influence of the Dibble family and at the same time establish himself as the next king. Alma's asked about the rules of the first duel, and Yuria explained. It is a one-on-one fight. The judge will be the high priest who decides who will win. The duel is a fight to the death. The winner will be the one who kills the opponent, but the priest will announce victory earlier if someone loses consciousness twice or surrenders. Alma's can choose weapons to his liking, but out of respect for ancient tradition, it is not fitting for him to use a long-range weapon. People will look down on him if he does. Alma said he understood and agreed to the duel. The king promised to inform Rhaegar, and the duel would begin in a week. Everyone relived the whole story once more to meet Griffin and tell him everything he said. He realized that the sword was needed not for sale, but to be used. Griffin gave Alma's a bunch of swords, but the only one among them that caused him pain. This sword was forged from dragon Damascus steel. Belmont told Rhaegar that he was ordered when Alma's returns not to bring his sword back because it smells too strong, and Rhaegar honestly never believed that Alma's would agree to this fight. Rhaegar laughed and said it didn't matter, he just needed to win the duel. He asked if Bernard thought he couldn't win, but assured himself that he was the strongest in the kingdom, although one should prepare for surprises, and laughed loudly again, saying they worried too much. The day of the duel came quickly. Yuria admitted that he was the one who lost in this fight and had to admit his mistake by prior agreement. He was to lose his land and property. Almas thought that this was his first duel against someone with a blessing, and especially against someone who had the same blessing as his sword. With a simple sword, he would have had no chance against such power, but with the griffin sword, he felt completely different. Full of strength and confident in battle. Almas quickly noticed Rigger's weak spot. He completely relied on his, as if blessed, swordsmanship, although it seemed he knew a little about fencing. He made a lot of unnecessary moves that Almas didn't even have to think about. If that was all he had, it was not enough to defeat King Ferme. Almas ended the fight with one move even before Rigger could beg for mercy and surrender. The sacred duel ended with Almas's victory. The Diable family was forced to give all their possessions and lands to the Ash family and even send an official apology to the king. Almas looked at Rigger, who angered him, and suddenly realized his autocracy was the root of the current trouble. This deeply upset him, and he wanted Rigger to change and become better when he returned. Almas did not expect the king to make remarks even to his own relatives, who applauded his decisiveness. He felt ashamed and hoped that next time they would not support him blindly. The next day, Almas returned to the palace, where the king praised him for his deed, and he himself said that he did not kill Rigger because he did not want to become a bloodthirsty person. The king replied that Almusu would be better off not killing Rigger. This would cause even more hatred towards him, although he did kill him. Unfortunately, the D family did not calm their grievances. They asked the king what good came from Rigger surrendering in the sacred duel. Everyone would now see him as a coward, and this destroys the honor of the Diable family. Yuria then said that he was sure the nobles who supported Rigger had already fled. While other barons were getting closer or had blood ties with the D family, Almas was looking for reasons to stay away. Now he asked himself, is surrendering in a duel really that bad? Yurit insisted that he listen. Surrendering in a sacred duel brings more benefits than it seems, especially since even nobles became warriors as soon as they entered a duel. The only acceptable outcome is victory or death. And don't forget, Rigger was the one who challenged him from the very beginning. Rai ordered his son to listen carefully. People expected two things: good governance and war, and everyone knew their downsides. The only thing that truly distinguished Rigger was his combat skills, better than most, so in this people saw a real superhero in him. But he lost to the king in battle, so he no longer had to stubbornly stick to the agreed marriage down to the smallest details. If he said he did not want to give Yuria to a man who surrendered in a sacred duel, that was a completely understandable and acceptable reason. Yuria impatiently asked her father if this was serious, and the king answered the same as before. He had no reason to give his daughter to Rigger. He asked everyone not to confuse. This does not mean he will accept Almas, but the throne cannot remain empty for long. Their wedding will be announced soon, and I asked if it would be better for Almas to do something extraordinary, because the king said they no longer needed great feats. Honestly, the king wants to strengthen the kingdom before the war with Demorger, so this marriage could very well become the perfect means for that. Another problem, they need to find a way to get rid of it. Most of Rigger's followers are people of bad blood, but Belmont is different. He is a loyal subject from the family, and alongside him are competent people. Nobles also sincerely trust him, and not without reason, because this very person holds the family. Conversation turned to the king's diplomacy, who noted that attracting his attention is very difficult for any kingdom, and Almas suggested establishing good relations or even an alliance with the kingdom of Alva. Unfortunately, this attracted the attention of the nomadic kingdom of Alva, which is located east of the kingdom of Raz and is known for its people crossing the volcanic belt. Recently, the Esch family, thanks to them, created a detachment of German cavalry. He heard about the nomadic nation from Demorger mines and realized, if they intervene in the war, they will become stronger than this kingdom. Direct confrontation is impossible to win. Raz meant that I would be driven into a defensive battle. So the existence of cavalry is extremely important for the Adelia society, so pay maximum attention to the preparation of Raz's cavalry, because cavalry gives an advantage over other kingdoms. Now there is a pressing question: how to get war horses. Alma said he wants to buy war horses from the people of Alva or even hire some of their mercenaries. The king understands, but the language barrier between them may make trade impossible. The king wants to invite the people they contacted and personally hear them, so Aints was called. He already had dealings with the people of Alva and has to tell about them. Inez said that their ancestors' horsemen ruled the besieged land, and the Alva Mountains cut them off from the whole world. Their population is very small. He heard that there are only about 1,000 people there. In childhood, they oddly pressed their noses with a bar to make their faces look fiercer and scare enemies. It's calmed everyone down. Don't worry and stop doing this on your noses, it's wasteful. Sometimes they trade goods with the Alva's wool and other merchandise because those hidden behind the mountains hardly know war, and Bartolome thought that this is exactly why Alvian horsemen could very well be near them. He also thinks that they are concerned about the continuation of the conquest of Damager to the southern Roses, and Bartolome was sent as an envoy to the land of Alva. The Devourers urgently gathered and chose Almas to lead the defense against the overwhelming invasion of Amorgar. Almas confidently accepted command, resolutely determined to defend the territory of Ash and secure victory for his people. Yulia warmly supported Almas. Although she could not join, she remained a calming presence in the tense hall. Almas entrusted Yulia with the capital. She swore to protect it while he led the battle. Almas learned that the army of Damorgan numbered about 25,000 soldiers, a formidable enemy force. The forces of Ash number only 13,000. Many homes refused to support them, and because of this even minor offenses cause anxiety. Despite unrealistic odds and political betrayals, they almost maintained optimism and were ready to fight the invading army. The army was approaching Fort Talia, a newly repaired fortification that was key to their defensive strategy. Almas ordered the soldiers to rest, while he himself meanwhile told the new soldiers about the fort's defense and its recent improvements. Almas returned home and gloomily discussed with Tetra their tiny chances of winning against 25,000 soldiers. They planned to cut off the enemy's supplies and take advantage of Damorgar's bad relations with neighboring countries. Tetra said she believes in Almas's victory and encouraged him before the battle. The message struck like thunder. Enemy soldiers were spotted nearby and Almas had to act immediately. Almas and Tetra watched the huge Damorgar army preparing for invasion and realized how terrible this threat was. The 7-day battle begins, and on Tetra's confident advice, Almas himself is appointed the real commander. The Damorgan army relentlessly advances, preparing for confrontation, and tension is rising all around. Tenino, an officer of Damorgar, passionately discusses confidence in battle with Carlo, the commander and first prince of Damorgar. Tenino calls himself a general and quietly contemplates Carlo, his leadership, and the army's readiness. Tenino criticizes Carlos's talent, but at the same time respects how well he delegates tasks and takes responsibility. Tenino sincerely believes that united under Carlo's leadership, they can conquer Adelnia together and promises. Carlo reveals his plan, first to capture the lands of Esh and only then to seek peace so as not to rush immediately into war with Roses. The Damorgar army is advancing on Fort Telia, preparing siege tactics and decisive encirclement as soon as they arrive. We received news. The fortifications of Fort Telia are divided into 3 parts and there is a garrison of 8,000 soldiers stationed there. The commanders decide to concentrate troops at the northern gates of the fort, leaving the southern side weakly defended. Tenino warns supplies are limited, so it is vital to immediately take control of the supply route. Ignoring the fort means exposing oneself to a pincer attack. To survive, retreat routes must be reliably prepared. Tenino suggests first cautiously testing the enemy's combat strength by throwing slave warriors into battle. From the western tower of Fort Telia, Almas and Ron notice the first wave of the enemy rapidly advancing. The enemy is carrying logs and firewood, probably preparing to fill the moat and break through our defense. Almas orders the archers to release a hail of arrows toward the advancing enemies. The arrows fly but have little effect. The enemy is shielded by logs. Although the arrow missed, the enemy's lack of armor gives him natural protection from the strike. Almas calculates the enemy's cunning. They drop their armor to run faster and use logs as shields and tools. The enemy rushes swiftly to the moat, dodging arrows, while Almas orders the defenders not to cease fire. Almas notices some enemies throwing themselves into the moat. This reveals their desperation and determination. The enemies tie logs underwater, as if building a bridge to cross the moat. Almas watches in disbelief as the enemy tries to climb the fortress with a shaky ladder. Almas shoots at the enemy attempting to climb over the wall, defending the fortress with precise shots. Unarmed enemies cannot fight while climbing. Many slip and fall, and the rest are easily defeated by the defenders. Facing heavy losses, the enemy hastily retreats to their lines, abandoning the assault. Despite the retreat, the defenders argue whether to continue attacks or conserve arrows and men. Tenino heard that several slave soldiers survived and returned to tell the commanders about the failed assault. Tenino orders the execution of the returning slaves along with their families. Betrayal is punished harshly and cold-bloodedly. The archers instantly finish off the captured slaves. This shows Damorgar's ruthlessness towards defeats and failures. Tenino announces the next wave, joyfully celebrating the construction of the bridge that enabled an excursion across the moat. Suddenly the bridge explodes, stunning the Damorger army and disrupting their carefully planned siege strategy. Commanders tense up discussing the explosive device and anxiously ask themselves whether this failure means the collapse of Tenino's strategy. Tenino admits failure but assures that preparations for the next assault continue, although progress at the fort is lost. The siege towers are already erected and ready. The Damorger army prepares to immediately begin a full assault. A detailed inspection reveals the defense of Fort Tilia and the commanders on each tower. They are planning strategy. From the central tower, the defenders saw with relief the retreat of enemy slave soldiers, confirming that the defense succeeded. Almas and Tetra inspect the towers circumferentially for damage and confirm Fort Tilia is structurally undamaged after the attack. The defenders noticed the approaching assault towers and realized the enemy's main army has finally entered the battlefield. The enemy sets up shields and earthworks to close the distance and attack Fort Tilia. Shields and cover bring soldiers closer to the walls. It is clear that a large-scale coordinated fortress assault is approaching. The defenders respond with a hail of arrows, targeting the infantry, trying to stop the enemy's advance. Archers firmly hold the line across the moat and shout to the infantry, "Do not pay attention to the towers, focus the attacks." The siege tower advanced on Fort Tilia, filled with enemy soldiers ready to break through the fortress walls. Archers in the towers open fire, catching the defenders by surprise. They instantly hide from the volley of arrows. The defender-tensed enemy soldiers rapidly approached with shields toward the fort walls. Almas announces that he will use the newly built catapults for a counterattack. The goal is to sow chaos in the enemy ranks. The catapult was loaded and fired. A new phase of the fort's defense began. The catapult hurls a giant projectile toward the siege tower, aiming to quickly destroy the enemy's advance. The tower explodes wildly. It becomes clear that it was filled with black powder for maximum destructive effect. Despite the explosion, the tower remained intact and unusual frames saved it from destruction. Watching the fort's defense, the defenders suddenly realized the enemy is strengthening their towers with voodoo rituals. The towers are dressed in wet skin and metal, intertwined with magic to withstand the explosions. The assault tower moves forward, defenders duck and tighten their shields, and archers inside prepare to unleash a hail of arrows on the walls. The defenders realized before them were not slaves with light weapons but soldiers in heavy armor, well trained. Tetra recognizes the enemy commander and, like an experienced officer, precisely gives orders to the soldiers coordinating the artillery attack. The archers draw their bows and aim at the commander. Their goal is to disrupt the enemy's organized command chain. The defenders open fire, hoping to disable the enemy commanders and disrupt the pace of their assault. The siege towers relentlessly advance on the walls of Fort Tilia, challenging the defenders' hopes to stop their advance. The battle erupts. The defenders shout desperately, trying to repel the enemies attempting to break into the tower. Enemy soldiers climb the tower, preparing for hand-to-hand combat to capture the fortress. Defender Ron fights fiercely on the assault tower platform, repelling enemy soldiers with powerful blows. Enemy archers fiercely send arrows, trying to knock the defender off the edge of the tower. Ron swiftly knocks enemies off the tower, keeps the situation under control, and prevents them from breaching the walls. Ron orders the defenders to stay vigilant, resolutely determined to block the path of any enemy trying to pass the narrow trail. Arrows rain down around, and Ron confidently prepares to face these projectiles, watchful amid the chaos of the battlefield. Captain Ron is gathering his thoughts again, ready to fight side by side with Yosef to hold their siege tower. Yosef rushes into battle, desperately holding their position, while Ron supports him by giving strategic orders. Their efforts impress the defenders and raise morale as they repel enemy attacks together. Observers say that Ron and Yosef are the strongest swordsmen, confident that no breaches will break them. Meanwhile, other soldiers are gripped by panic. Enemy assault towers are already approaching the walls, preparing to break the defense. The enemy aggressively advances, breaking through shield walls and direct, brutal assaults. Commanders give the order, defenders form a strong wall, and archers surround the advancing enemies. The defenders fight desperately as enemies break through the wall, mercilessly storming with ladders and siege engines. An alarm sounds. Boats have approached under the wall, a sign that the enemy is preparing to outflank us. The enemy turns the boats into floating platforms and builds improvised steps and supports from them to climb the fort walls. The defenders are stunned. Enemy plans revealed coordinated ladder assaults, and some commanders are drinking amid the chaos. An enemy soldier was thrown down, but the defenders are worried the main strike seems aimed at the western tower. Commanders tensely discuss the enemy's plans and understand the eastern tower is guarded by battle-hardened fighters. Preparations begin. They prepare a new mighty siege weapon created by Almas for battle to repel the attackers. Commanders give the signal to open fire, planning a simultaneous attack to intimidate the enemies. The new weapon opens fire, shocking the defenders with its powerful and unexpected destructive force. A cannonball crashed into the siege towers, causing devastating explosions and threatening the enemy's advance. Huge fires suddenly flare up on the walls, and chaos and panic engulf the stormers below. The defenders resolutely prepare to strengthen the offensive. This time they aim directly at the enemy's assault towers. The commander ordered the siege towers to be set on fire, intensifying the already fierce defense of the fortress. The assault tower was engulfed in flames. Fire and oil worked, although it proved resistant to black powder. The defender looked at the burning assault tower and with a bitter smile noted that the hot oil was better, although the black powder failed. Suddenly Tetra appears. She is a mage sent as reinforcement to help in the battle. Tetra releases a magical fireball in a counterattack, a loud reminder that she is incredibly powerful in defense. Tetra's magic frightened the soldiers. They initially took her for a voodoo shaman. Tetra enthusiastically explains the magical mechanism of the fire cannon, how the combination of black powder and oil produces a powerful flame. The weapon consumes tons of fuel and can explode if the circle of fire magic is stopped. Fire cannon's strike burns the enemy siege tower, disrupting their assault and defense. The soldiers rejoice wildly. They survived the first day of battle because reinforcements arrived and they managed to hold the defense. When night fell, the enemy camp surveyed their losses and quietly asked themselves, was their attack worth such a price? The wounded during the siege are recovering actively. Some jumped into the moat to survive. Enemy generals whispered about how the fire cannon's strike shook the fighting spirit and the price this battle took. In a conversation about strategy, it turned out that the fortress was surrounded, but the defenders planned to wear down the attackers. Almas receives a letter listing the wounded and dead and bitterly reflects on the cost of the defense. Ron beams with optimism. Their army lost fewer and overall they maintain the advantage. Commanders decided to allow the soldiers to drink a little to support morale during the long night of the siege. Barreau sincerely praises Tetra and the soldiers for their efforts, and the tension among the defenders slightly eases. The leaders argued whether to stay alert or rest, but eventually agreed to drink cautiously and take turns on guard duty. The night fell quietly until suddenly the alarm howled. The enemy unexpectedly attacked the fortress. Ron and the group tensely prepare for the approaching enemies, estimating how many there might be, but barely distinguish the silhouettes. The night attackers use the darkness. Without torches, they quietly sneak up to catch the fortress defenders by surprise. The leaders notice the attackers' strategy to hide their numbers and sow chaos under the cover of night. Walking in the dark is difficult, but the attackers aim to confuse the defenders before the real assault. Suddenly, arrows flew from an ambush, and the defenders unexpectedly found themselves under fire from invisible enemies. Enemy soldiers hide under the siege debris and try to break out, revealing their retreat from the fortress battlefield. The defenders gathered their thoughts and, still holding on from the shock, asked, what was the purpose of this noisy, seemingly chaotic night attack on the fortress? The enemies try to break the defenders' spirit. They intimidate them and constantly harass them during the prolonged watch. Commanders scrutinize the situation because if the defenders make a mistake, the attackers will swiftly exploit any weakness. They decide to divide their forces. One group repels attacks, the other lets half the soldiers rest. Despite the plan, continuous attacks give the defenders not a moment of peace at night. The soldiers wake at dawn. Morale is lifted after a good rest. They are ready for today's siege battle. Commanders heatedly discussed the duration of the siege and finally agreed. Under continuous pressure, the fortress should fall within 2 weeks. On the second day, the army confidently stands behind Almas Esh to continue the powerful offensive. The second day of the siege at the fortress Tyria begins. The soldiers barely endure fatigue and the constant roar of battle. Ron, irritated by distractions, vows to focus despite fatigue and the relentless archers' fire. While Ron fends off attackers, the defenders feel the archers' accuracy falter under enemy pressure. Command orders to prepare the fire cannon. The defenders hope its fire will turn the tide of battle. Fire cannon fires. The wooden assault tower is engulfed in flames, and chaos reigns among the enemy. Ron joyfully celebrates burning the siege tower. The enemies, unaware of this, gather and prepare a second attack. Defender says, fire cannons require a pause, watch carefully for the enemy's next move. Ron aggressively encourages the troops while the garrison looks suspiciously at the enemy's unexpected, unusual tactics. Rose warns, conserve flamethrower ammunition, the enemy's fire mixture is almost impervious to flame. The defenders decided to use Tetra's knowledge to overcome the enemy's strange strategy and dispel the unknown threat. Tetra voluntarily offers to remove the magical barrier of the siege tower, explaining how to use the special talisman. She casts Dispel Magic, the protective barrier around the enemy tower rapidly begins to weaken. Tetra releases a magical projectile, and it strikes the now defenseless assault tower with a powerful blow. The tower collapsed with a loud crash, shocking both sides and sharply affecting the course of the siege battle. The defenders, stunned by the sudden loss of the barrier, immediately asked Tetra to lead the assault. Enemy soldiers recognized Tetra as a voodoo master and rushed to capture her in the midst of battle. Tetra swiftly responds, skillfully repelling the attackers and surprising with her hand-to-hand combat mastery. The defenders insistently urge Tetra to retreat, the enemy has trapped her, and the siege is intensifying. The soldiers collectively form a shield around Tetra, protecting her from further enemy attacks. Commanders are tense, discussing what threat magic poses on the front line, and insist Tetra must be defended at any cost. The western tower is under siege, soldiers hold the walls, and enemies storm with ladders and rain arrows. Tetra and Ron discuss that strange little siege machine that recently appeared on the battlefield. The new siege machine is unlike usual towers, it seems to be a mobile battering ram. They were figuring out the enemy's change in tactics, puzzled that he abandoned siege towers. The enemy pushes the battering ram forward, preparing to seriously breach the fort's defense. Enemies throw debris from fallen towers, fill the moat, and make a temporary bridge out of it. Defenders worry that the battering ram will move forward as soon as the moat is filled with debris. Fire falls on the battering ram, but its protection proves better than siege towers. Defenders are surprised. The roof, slanted like a ram's horn, deflects arrows, and the magical barrier only strengthens it, irritating archers. Commanders decide to strike the soldiers building the bridge, but the voodooists do not hurry to help them. The enemy builds a temporary bridge over the moat from debris of destroyed assault towers. Lulu appears on the front line and, without hesitation, voluntarily joins the plan to stop the battering ram. She prepares to break through the barrier covering the battering ram and agrees on the right moment with Ron. Ron grabs an explosive spear in his hands, ready to attack the soldiers crossing the new bridge made of debris. Lulu begins to sing a spell, holding magical talismans, preparing to disrupt the enemy's advance. Lulu casts a powerful dispel spell, aiming directly at the support of the enemy's makeshift bridge. The explosion destroys the bridge debris, and parts of the battering ram crash down with a roar. The defenders burst with joy, the battering ram is destroyed, but they remain alert because danger is still approaching. Several battering rams are still approaching the enemy, and despite failures, he continues to advance. Ron leads the defense of the western tower, preparing for another explosive attack. Ron gathers the defenders at the central tower and prepares for a decisive and ruthless counterattack. Messenger Hawk arrives and brings news. The first phase of their plan has succeeded. The Domwerger military camp is spread across the entire valley, preparing for the decisive battle that will soon erupt. Tenino confidently says that their siege tactics worked. They filled the enemy's moat with debris. Carlo notices Tenino's progress and, believing in victory, says they expect to capture the western tower. Suddenly, Tenino laughs ominously, and his subordinate urgently warns about an unexpected alarming event near Carlo. They learn that the village of Dori on their supply route has fallen, and this frightened everyone due to the possible disruption of supplies. Tenino finds out that 3,000 Ross's horsemen suddenly captured the village of Dori, and this news deeply worries the camp leaders. Although they guarded the only road between the kingdoms, they cannot understand how such a large force passed unnoticed. They consider other routes, but no, the mountains are impassable, so only the forest remains. Carlo recalled a whisper going around the village, Almaz-Esh, supposedly the son of Griffin, and perhaps he is leading the enemy cavalry. Tenino says the patrols were weak, he is to blame, and tension rises. It is urgent to stop the enemy's unexpected movement through the forest. Generals and nobles urgently gathered in the tent, while the army relentlessly stormed the fortress. Carlo, with a heavy voice, reported that the village of Dori had fallen, their supply route was cut off, so he proposed a temporary retreat. Several nobles flared with anger, rejected the retreat, and accused Baraus of not taking the war seriously. Bears explained that the fate of their family depends on the outcome of the war and emphasized how important this land is to them. Despite the tension, Carlo calmly reminded them that retreat would also hurt his chances of becoming the next king. Hanino agrees with Barros, rejects the idea of retreat, and plans to send troops to retake the village of Dori. Carlo says the enemy controls only a small piece of their territory, and this is what gives Damorger the advantage. Although wary, the nobles agreed, sending 4,000 infantrymen and 1,000 horsemen should reclaim the lost village. Carlo, enthusiastically praising Barros for his leadership, appoints him commander of the mission to retake the village of Dori. Leading 5,000 soldiers, Beres takes command and promises to retake the village of Dori for Carlos's cause. The army steps into the dangerous Griffin forest and hurries to reach the darkness because ambushes lie in wait here. The soldiers hurry through the forest, anxiously thinking about Almes and their comrades fighting deeper in enemy territory. The group excitedly discusses the impressive cavalry of Roses, especially the Ash family squad that united with the Hermanus people. Almes's cavalry is relentless and skilled. Among them are warriors of the Exodus tribe led by their king. Raymond admits this is his first leadership experience, and he jokes that he will hand over command to the king of the Exodus tribes. Night is approaching, and the soldiers anxiously search for a hidden, safe corner to set up camp without lighting fires. Next morning, the army prepares to attack a small border village and give the horses a rest. The soldiers rush through the village streets and suddenly storm the enemy with a swift raid. Peaceful residents flee in panic as Damorger's soldiers storm the village, breaking its defense swiftly and decisively. The village elder learned with horror that Rose's soldiers had defeated Damorger's troops nearby. The villagers surrender, pleading for mercy and agreeing to raise the Rose flag, no longer resisting. Damorger's warriors do not burn the village. The provisions have already been taken from Dori's village. Carlo extends mercy to the village head and asks for cooperation that he surrender peacefully and support their cause. Rose's cavalry goes from village to village, storming them and convincing people to lay down arms and raise flags, then moving on. In Dori's village, the captured chief informs Damorger's soldiers that they have been offered to surrender. Village defenders feel that their infantry will not withstand the pressure of the enemy cavalry, and alarm rises among their ranks. They hurriedly close the gates and take positions, preparing to stop the approaching enemy cavalry. Rose's cavalry appears and rushes swiftly towards the village. Coordinated, agile mounted archers charge into the attack. The defenders unsuccessfully try to deal with the accurate shots of the mounted archers shooting from the fortress walls. Even more mounted reinforcements arrive, the pressure increases, the defenders panic, they cannot hit the moving targets. Rose's cavalry has surrounded the fortress. There are so many of them that the ground trembles, and they prepare to unleash a coordinated hail of arrows. Raymond contemplates the danger of being surrounded, but knows that eventually he will have to surrender. The soldiers prepare and push the ballista closer to the fortress walls to attack the defenders. The ballista operator has already loaded the black powder bolts and is preparing for an attack that could break the defense. Raymond orders the ballista team to fire, and thus begins the first battle of the Rose cavalry. The ballista volleys smash the fortress gates, the wood splintered, and a huge breach immediately formed. The defenders panic as the gates fall, fearing that the enemy will break inside at once. Rose's cavalry burst through the destroyed gates, shouting threateningly and determined to storm the fortress. Fierce battle erupts, both sides clash, mounted riders charge and attack, and the defenders desperately counterattack. Pink soldiers are breaking deeper inside, sowing chaos as the fortress is flooded by invaders. The captain bravely rushes towards the invaders, determined not to let them pass through the gates. Raymond threatens the captain. He is forced to surrender, and the weapon reluctantly falls from his hands. Raymond promises mercy to those who surrender, openly saying this is his tactical kindness for the sake of strategy. He says that civilians and those who surrender will be spared, urging them to survive for the sake of their families. The defenders reluctantly surrender, and Rose's troops swear to punish only the true instigators of the war. Rose's army arrived at the village of Dora and inspected the last granary after their recent invasion. Captain Raymond ordered Virgil to set fire to the grain storage, preparing to deprive the enemy of valuable supplies. Flames engulfed the wooden granaries, black smoke rose upwards, and the soldiers calmly watched as everything around was destroyed. Rosewell doubted whether it was worth wasting food, but Raymond preferred speed and survival over burdening the marching army. Meanwhile, in the city of Pomegranate Mines, Run passionately dreamed of joining the battles his family was fighting elsewhere. Run grumbled that he was left behind and desperately wanted to use his lightspeed slash against Almies. Panicked messenger reported that the army of Rosie captured the village of Dor and moved further with 3,000 soldiers. Run sneered contemptuously, confident that his father's news confirmed the troops of Rosie's were trapped in Tyria. Realizing the threat, Run imagined breaking the army of Rosses to prove that he was a skilled strategist. Run, confident in the strength of the citadel, decided to hold the line and simultaneously call for reinforcements. The cavalry army of Roses appeared near Braz and suddenly broke the defenders' resistance with a coordinated, swift offensive. Roses demanded the capitulation of Braz city, revealing that he knew about the vulnerable, almost empty garrison of the city. Run realized that Roses had formed alliances and acquired better cavalry. They were approaching the assault faster than expected. Overcome with despair, Run found fewer than 100 soldiers without immediate reinforcements. Defense was impossible. Finally, Braz city surrendered without a fight. It opened its gates to the victorious troops of Rossasi who surrounded it. Pink soldiers entered the city of Braz, admiring its pomegranate wealth after an easy surrender. The soldiers loudly celebrated, finding spices, gold, and glass jewelry while looting the captured city. Virgil sincerely thanked for the opportunity to serve Rosewold and dreamed of freedom, while the captain prioritized collecting official documents. In the papers, they listed villages, leaders, and taxes. They valued them more than any gold because they provided control. Roses, understanding the role Ryuan had in the administration, decided to make him a useful political hostage. At first, Run refused to become a hostage, proudly declaring that the residents of Braz adored him. Rhea threatened Run by targeting the safety of his family and forced him to reluctantly agree to go with them. That night, the Rose troops planned to defend Braz city and prepare for counterattacks. Amos's allies received news of the Rose's victory and prepared to possibly reinforce the front. Next morning, Braz troops rushed to the village of Dora, learning that the Rossis army had already left. Braz commander was confused and panicked when he realized that the Rasses army threatened his territory and endangered his family. He directed all troops toward Braz city, abandoning the initial mission to retake the village of Dora. And the Damorger army at the Tyria fortress received news that the city of Braz had fallen. The shocking defeat forced the Damorger commanders to urgently gather to quickly review plans and devise a new course of action. Opinions were divided to retreat, reinforce the troops, or risk continuing the siege with only 3,000 invaders. Carlos calmly ordered to retreat, stunning the Damorger commanders with his decisive and strategic choice. He explained that regrouping would prevent even greater losses, and the council prepared with heavy hearts to withdraw the troops. Another commander bitterly mourned the retreat, fearing it would bury his reputation and shatter his dreams of a military career. An urgent order was given to recall the scattered troops and request reinforcements from the kingdom's capital. Carlos donned armor for negotiations, while Tolnino swore to cover the army's vulnerable flank. Tolnino himself took on the task of covering the retreat, although he knew well that Almas had previously defeated him in battle. Near the fortress Teria, Tonino vowed to safely escort Carlo during the withdrawal. Scouts reported 8,000 enemies, so an assault with their small detachment was extremely risky. Tolnino's flank was ready to give their lives to buy time and allow the main army to retreat. The soldiers pressed against their shields. Enemy bombs were approaching, and they began a desperate defensive maneuver. Explosions devastated the battlefield, scattering soldiers as enemy bombardments tore through their defensive line. Frightened warriors realized that only prayer could save them from the approaching deadly fire. Tolnino urgently ordered the scattered soldiers to gather, because the enemy cavalry was rushing straight at their position. Almas led the cavalry in an attack, charging forward with steel determination and stunning Tolnino's frightened soldiers. De Morgan's formation completely fell apart. The soldiers who recognized Tonino's strategy could no longer withstand the relentless force. De Morgan's flank detachment suffered devastating losses and retreated from the fortress of Tyria as their fighting spirit and formation completely disintegrated. At the fortress of Tyria, scouts noticed Damorger's army retreating. A chance appeared for a strategic counterattack. Almas's plan worked. The enemy retreated and left their supply line vulnerable to a decisive strike. The commanders ordered preparations for the offensive, insisting on caution to avoid reckless attacks during the upcoming battle. The soldiers prepared. Long fatigue and irritation from constant defense turned into a firm resolve to deliver a counterstrike that was about to begin. Almost relinquishing command, he decided to rush into the front ranks alongside Sakura and his loyal horse. Before the battle, Almaz was grooming his horse and preparing his comrades, clearly distributing duties for the upcoming fight. Their army stood ready, full of confidence in their superiority, looking the enemy straight in the eyes without resorting to deception or trickery. Commanders gave the order to load the ballistae with black powder. They were to break the enemy formation even before the main assault began. When the formation began to break apart, Ron led the soldiers forward, urging them on and ordering not to lessen the pressure. Panic erupted on the flank of Damorger. Some soldiers abandoned their positions and fled, while the commanders desperately clung to the defensive lines. Helena ordered a tactical retreat. The right wing was formed near the forest to better hold the defense. The flank army was preparing to sacrifice the left wing to buy time for the main retreat. On the third day, Almas finally reached the border village where the surviving enemies had gathered. He almost ordered Bartholomew to surround the village because he saw there were neither supplies nor fortifications there. When the soldiers moved forward, enemy archers suddenly unleashed a volley of arrows that unexpectedly struck the vanguard units. Almas ordered Ron to lead the attack. He wanted to avoid unnecessary casualties during the assault. In the village, unarmed civilians begged for mercy, saying that the Damorger soldiers had already left these places. Almas organized a search, tended to the wounded soldiers, and at the same time chased after the enemies who suddenly attacked with arrows. Heleno's group decided to spend the night first to securely fix the position, and only then to move further. Supplies and arrows previously gathered by the construction team were delivered so they could hold out until morning. Helnino built wooden barricades to protect against attacks from the sky, but they proved useless against gunpowder weapons. Intelligence reported that the enemy had already barricaded themselves in the second village. The defense was ready even before Almas arrived. They almost decided to avoid a night attack and spend the night in the camp until dawn to avoid losses. Nino's troops safely reached the village of Doris thanks to careful plans and coordinated retreat. On the fourth day, Tolnino rejoined the main Damorger army. He was met with relief and respect. Tolnino returned alive but paid a heavy price. It made them value that at least one soldier survived. He immediately asked the officers to report on the situation. It was necessary to quickly assess the state of the battlefield. The reports spoke of destroyed fortifications, burned supplies, and thinned ranks. Their army had been reduced to 15,000. Ruse returned to the city and did not even respond to orders. This worried everyone and sowed uncertainty. Tolnino suddenly received urgent news. King Damorger finally sent the long-awaited response to their request. Tolnino was ordered to hold out for 3 days, although everyone feared their forces would not endure. He believed the enemy was unlikely to risk a direct attack, so he planned to wait for the return of Bras's army. Both sides held their breath, wondering who would reach the door first, reinforcements or enemies. Almas gladly praised the horse Sakura for enduring the campaign, and then met again with Burrose and Tetra. Burrose suggested capturing the village of Dori, but Almas preferred to wait until the entire army returned. Almas allowed the troops to rest and have fun. This boosted morale after exhausting recent battles. In Browse City, Raymond faced Rune one-on-one and put his family at stake in tense negotiations. Run refused to surrender, so Raymond immediately prepared for battle to retrieve the hostage. Raymond rallied his soldiers and ordered them to prepare for battle against the enemy general. Before the battle, enemy cavalry suddenly charged, so Browse had to respond instantly to this strike. Browse ordered the cavalry to advance to intercept the enemy. He expected a direct cavalry fight. Mudio gladly accepted the frontal clash, confident he could exploit the situation against Browse's advancing rider. Mudio declared that his riders were skilled archers, enhanced by the blessing of the wind spirit. His archers struck first, breaking Browse's ranks and inflicting losses among the advancing cavalry. Pretending to retreat, Mudio withdrew his forces and prepared a trap for the pursuer Braz. Then Braz gave the order to retreat so that their formation would not collapse under the enemy's pressure. During the retreat, the enemy cavalry mockingly taunted them, provoking skirmishes and fueling heated personal vendettas. Confident that the enemy archers were weak, Braz's cavalry rushed in pursuit to destroy them before the retreat. Mudio sensed their aggression in advance because he knew closer and they would rush in pursuit despite knowing about the trap. When the enemy came closer, Mudio gave the signal. His troops launched a counterattack and surrounded them. Braz's forces realized too late. Enemy horsemen surrounded them from all sides. From the flank, another enemy army was approaching. The ring was tightening. No retreat routes remained. 3 places stood on the brink of battle. Troops lined up in strategic positions, and each side cautiously awaited the other's move. Vilger's detachment froze in place by the captain's order, protecting Museo during the tense confrontation. From the height, soldiers saw how the enemy cavalry was breaking apart because Raymond's strategy shattered their initial formation. The troops assessed the threat of the kingdom of Rosie's cavalry, prepared defense, and at the same time firmly believed in the power of Rhea and Vilger. A signal flare shot upward, giving the Rosewold detachment the sign to advance. Thus began the long-awaited maneuver on the battlefield. Rosewold led the cavalry in the assault. The soldiers surged forward roaring, while the defenders tensed to cover the vulnerable flanks. Vilger rushed forward, making his way through the soldiers blocking the road, and shouted to Rhea, "Go forward." Rhea and Vilger acted in amazing synchrony, striking the enemy soldiers, while Rosewold watched with a quiet, confident smile. Rhea decisively swung her weapon on horseback and knocked down an enemy amid the chaotic clash. The Rosewold detachment followed closely, cavalry and infantry breaking into the confused enemies, breaking their defense with relentless pressure. Cavalry crashed into the shielded infantry, and chaotic clashes immediately flared. Soldiers raised their shields and strained to withstand the assault. The enemy ranks wavered under the pressure. Horses trampled the lines, soldiers fell, and chaos reigned across the battlefield. A sudden fall knocked a horse off its feet. Soldiers panicked, shouting as the attack began to falter. Bodies and horses flew through the air, Raz's chaotic army completely losing control of the formation. Rosewold calmly assessed the situation, noting the enemy's inexperience, while his troops disciplinedly continued the tactical advance. Panic gripped the enemy as Rose's soldiers fled, and Rosewold urged Vilger forward to exploit the chaos. Rhea with the cavalry chased forward, and the formation of Braz's army completely fell apart under relentless tactical pressure. Braz panicked when he realized that his troops in heavy armor were surrounded and scattered by attacks from several sides. The enemy infantry fled in terror when the cavalry crashed down on them, and Braz boiled with rage over the displayed cowardice. Braz, enraged and desperate, charged forward himself, promising to fight despite the chaos in his army. Mighty Knight blocked their path. Rosewold ordered Rhea and Vilger to retreat. Braz appeared and directly challenged Rosewold one-on-one, threatening to cleave him in a duel. Rosewold met Braz head-on and struck fiercely. Their swords clashed amid the chaos of the battlefield. With one decisive blow, Rosewold knocked Braz off his horse. The general fell to the ground in the middle of the battlefield. Braz struggled to his feet, facing Rosewold's spear, and Rosewold coldly warned him, "Do not make a single reckless move." On the fourth morning, victory was declared. Braz and his son were taken alive. Raymond's squad returned triumphantly. Soldiers shouted with joy, and the commander led his victorious fighters through the camp. Raymond humbly thanked Rosewold and Museo, and his son sincerely praised him for the success. Almas checked the loot, and the prisoners confirmed that the entire Braz family was taken. Braz, unbroken even in captivity, warned that his brother and son would one day take revenge. Almas felt the approach of the final battle and assessed the enemy's strength, knowing that the family was still under his control. In Domorger's camp, desertion was increasing while Almas's troops prepared for the decisive battle. Palanino was called to a strategic meeting. It became clear that their position was worsening and urgent decisions were needed. He recalled past retreats and realized that it was Carlo's orders that had previously saved their forces from complete destruction. At the military council, Carlo addressed the gathered commanders, preparing them for the critical battle ahead. Surrounded by stern faces, the young commander entered the hall and felt the tension among the assembled leaders. Carlos's faction waited inside, and when Tonino joined them, he clearly felt that political disagreements could undermine their unity before the advancing enemy. Informants confirmed 15,000 soldiers remained opposing 13,000 enemies, forces nearly equal. The commander challenged everyone in the hall, demanding plans on how to defeat the advancing Rossi army, though the chances were very slim. Silence fell. Everyone felt the truth. Hope alone would not replace a concrete plan for victory. As losses only grew, Carlo proposed surrender. He feared total collapse if the fight continued. Rada, although reluctantly, agreed. There was no longer any strategy that could overturn Rossi's advantageous position and his relentless offensives. The Domorger army sent a messenger, and Almas accepted the truce without any resistance. On the fourth night, near the village of Doris in the lands controlled by Rossi, negotiations were being prepared. Almas firmly decided to defend his side because he knew well his opponent was a powerful prince. Carlo entered the negotiation tent and greeted politely. Almas was already sitting opposite at the table. Both leaders exchanged restrained words and acknowledged that it was important to resolve the tension between their kingdoms. Carlo proposed a one-year truce to buy some peace for a year, without giving up his southern ambitions. Almas agreed. He understood that a prolonged conflict would bring no advantage if there were no proper siege means against fortified positions. Carlo then announced the territory of Browse would be given entirely as compensation for the war. Almes was stunned by Carlo's proposal, but immediately realized how difficult it would be to defend such a territory. He reduced his claims to western Browse itself and asked instead of extra land for real master blacksmiths. Carlo agreed. He felt that knowledge and human strength mattered more than uncontrolled lands. Almas proposed taking ransom for the captured members of the Browse family, a way to earn money and benefit both kingdoms. Finally, Almas asked Carlo to stay in his kingdom until the official agreement was signed. Almas confidently concluded his proposal, and Carlo felt surprise at his strategic foresight and cautious approach in negotiations. Carlos acknowledged Almas's cunning, and Almas modestly reminded that he was the future claimant to the throne. The meeting ended, and Almas's allies joyfully celebrated the truce as a great victory. He swore to seize the throne and protect Yuryu, putting the safety of the family above all else. His ambitions reached further: to protect allies and orphans, to unite everyone under his future rule. Carlo felt that a brutal civil war was looming, and it would demand recognition from all nobles, even from Bella. The Dable faction could be crushed, but the price was the ruin of the kingdom and open doors for enemies. He almost felt that true victory required preserving lives, minimizing losses to protect the weakened kingdom from foreign predators. The recent victory over Damorgar gave Almes a chance and reason to strike first. Wasting no time, the Resissa troops rushed home, preparing for the impending internal battle with Abel. After days of relentless marching, the troops returned to the Ashlands, where they were warmly welcomed by the peasants who had been waiting. Though tired, the leader insisted on haste, for he knew their mission still demanded swift action against looming threats. He deployed 1,000 soldiers to guard the settlement to keep it safe while the campaign continued. At the meeting with Muzio, the general hesitated, whether it was wiser to return home now than to stay here longer. The general hinted at a secret and promised to reveal something intriguing if they delayed a little. The army marched through the lands of Esha without any stop, and by the next day reached the capital of Rose. Crowds filled the streets, loudly chanting. The celebration surpassed even that which followed their previous victory over King Ferme. Their victory over a stronger enemy elevated Almas's glory and ignited passionate admiration among the inhabitants of Rosa. Realizing how important the people's support was, Almas called his troops to proudly show their strength before everyone. In the very heart of the inner castle Rossasis, orders echoed, roles were assigned, and vigilance kept to ensure future plans proceeded flawlessly. Almas was greeted by the people in power, showering him with praise for the success and acknowledging that it was he who repelled Damorgar's forces. Though impatient allies constantly intervened and interrupted, his escort insisted on hurrying to the king. The urgent matter could not tolerate delay. He walked alongside his comrades, silently enduring the mockery about political enemies and going deeper into the Fortress of Roses. At the entrance to the audience hall, Almas announced his return, and the king's close associates warmly welcomed him. In the magnificent hall, Almas strode toward the throne, and the courtiers lined up on both sides stood in respectful silence. Companions stood nearby, holding their breath, watching tensely as the decisive exchange of words with the king began. The king generously praised Amos for his achievements, which prompted him to simultaneously ask for Princess Yuria and the royal throne. His audacious demand stunned the audience, while Yuria remained calm and awaited the king's response. The king gave more than was asked, offering Yuria the throne and another unknown gift. In delight, Almas and Yuria met again in the hall and reached out to each other, celebrating. "I accidentally embraced Yuria and kissed her, sealing our alliance before the watchful eyes of the crowd." And then he promised never to let her go, and Yuria, without hesitation for a moment, accepted this. Putting on the crown, Almas raised the royal scepter. The people erupted with shouts of loyalty. Holding hands with Yuria, he walked forward, and the citizens chanted for their new king. Almas forced the celebration to quiet down, reminding everyone that the war continues and victory has not yet been achieved. Almas announced that enemies were still hiding in the kingdom and ordered Prince Carlo to be brought. Suddenly Carlo appeared and began naming high-ranking aristocrats suspected of aiding the enemies. The last on the list was Diable. All were accused of treason based on Carlos's testimonies and evidence. The revelation stunned the court, and urgent questions immediately arose: how to deal with such high-profile suspected traitors. Almas decided that execution was necessary, and without hesitation ordered all identified merchants to be eliminated. Guards instantly subdued the accused nobles and commanded them to surrender without resistance during the arrest. Chaos erupted in the hall as soldiers subdued the suspects while Almas watched from the throne. Almas challenged the assembly, questioned their loyalty, and asked if there were any objections to his coronation or rule. Meeting no resistance, he declared that removing all traitors would be his next priority. Commanders reported Almas deployed forces to eliminate 9,000 enemies who were here. And Almas declared that he would personally lead the remaining forces to crush Reincarnated. Then he again confirmed alliances with loyal comrades so that they would continue to stand for him under his rule. They swore to fight together because they knew that the campaign against their enemies was far from over. Almas thought long about his decision, knowing it would haunt him but still considered it necessary. Almas ordered the army to be divided into 3 divisions and aimed them at the territory of the Dible faction to completely suppress it. The military stormed into the building, shouting at civilians to stay in place while simultaneously sweeping the area. Troops, by the king's order, arrested everyone inside and were already preparing to move to the next target. In the Dible fort, refugees gathered in despair, not knowing whether their leader would protect them or abandon them. Bartololo rallied his soldiers, announced that the people in the barricaded fortress were merchants, and ordered an immediate assault. Rosa's army marched to the Dible estate, catching the defenders by surprise with their sudden, coordinated offensive. Commander Ron's soldiers surrounded the mansion in a tight ring, blocked all escape routes, and gained complete tactical advantage. By Almas's order, they pretended to wait but were actually watching to ensure that Rigger had no escape route. Inside, Rigger, enraged, reproached Gilbert. Why did he gather troops here instead of helping in the previous battles? The guard exposed the allies who sided with Almas, calling them cowards who betrayed him for their own survival. Rigger angrily attributed their weakness to loss of strength and ordered Gilbert to gather the rest of the available army. Gilbert publicly agreed to take the task, but secretly considered Rigger hopeless. Saving him from defeat was impossible and advised. The advisor suggested calming Almas with mercy, while Gilbert insisted on regrouping his last soldiers. Meanwhile, Almas's main army was advancing on the city. Chances for peace for both sides were melting before their eyes. They almost decided that one faction must fall. They believed that Rigger's survival would endanger the Ash faction. A woman fervently begged Almas not to forget that some members of the Dible faction were innocent. Almas assured her that he would not kill everyone, but refusing all executions could lead to rebellion in the future. He decided to punish everyone who refused to fight for the kingdom during the war. If nobles or relatives were forced under political or family pressure, exceptions could be made for them. Almas promised to spare civilians but swore not to forgive those who resisted his army. Almas revealed half of the testimonies that spared certain people were deliberately fabricated. A genuine letter with the plan of the uprising did exist, but the authorities mostly ignored its weight as evidence. Almas assured that his chosen strategy would effectively minimize casualties and at the same time reliably protect the kingdom. Next morning at dawn, the arrival of Almas was announced. Troops gathered near the battlefield. Standing before the assembled soldiers and allies, Almas was about to move forward. His planned decisive actions turned out to be a mistake. Ron reported that he had surrounded the area and driven the members of the Riggar faction into their own houses. Almas ordered the army to advance on the mansion, confident in his numerical superiority. When the troops rushed into the attack, a sudden commotion stopped them a few steps from the gates of the fortified estate. The defenders suddenly opened the gates and Almas's troops, who were watching, froze in confusion. Soldiers appeared with white flags, surrendering Rigger, who fiercely accused Gilbert of betrayal. Rigger was forcibly presented as a prisoner, and his allies surrendered without any real battle. Gilbert approached Almas, renounced loyalty to Riggar, and swore to serve Almas, although they were relatives. Almas recognized Gilbert and sharply asked about his intentions, while Rigger fiercely protested from captivity. Gilbert assured his loyalty to King Rosie, recalled old meetings and how it seemed to him that the king himself noticed him. Suddenly Alma ordered Ron to arrest Gilbert, and Ron, stunned, demanded explanations. Ron reminded Gilbert of numerous crimes committed under Riggar, emphasizing that this contradicted his supposed loyalty to Almas. Almas asked Gilbert to stand up, and Gilbert stubbornly repeated that it was not his fault. Riggar told Almas that they met under unfortunate circumstances and assured that he never truly hated him. Alma pronounced the sentence execution, stating that their rivalry and conflict over Uria could not continue. Riggar bowed low, desperately begging for his life, and Alma sighed and considered his request. He almost ordered to arrest and imprison Rhaegar, hinting to him to beg for mercy for the sake of his family's safety. Yuria confronted the captured Rhaegar, and this ended their struggle with the Debil faction. Abdamas called Yuri to return with him, but Tetra quickly intervened and corrected his inadvertent statement. The three decided to go home together, sharing a moment of relief after the conflict. Suddenly, laughter from the crowd interrupted their departure. Almas and Tetra looked back to understand where it was coming from. Almas and Yuria heard mocking voices and realized that their language, thanks to magical blessing, matched her own. Almas warned of approaching danger and urged comrades to be on alert in case of sudden threat. Rhaegar was suddenly attacked, and in a shocking assault, blood burst from his mouth. Chaos erupted around Yuria, and she struggled to understand the sudden events rapidly unfolding around her. The narrator introduced Sami, an officer who recorded the entire 7-day war in the chronicles. Rhaegar died from a rare disease that caused blood to flow from all body orifices, thus ending the 7 days' war. Returning to the palace of Razate, he almost went out before the crowd to declare himself heir. Despite the announcement, he clarified, officially he was not yet king because the conditions were not met. Not being married to Yuria, he was deprived of the right to inheritance. Tradition denied him until he received the god's blessing and underwent purification rites. While preparing the wedding and ceremony, the heart tightened at the thought that an official coronation would follow. When the nobility gathered for congratulations, he fussed over duties and wondered how the Rasichi managed to attract so much attention. Having almost overcome the growing threats and naturally proven his strength, he began to attract more and more attention from all kingdoms. Delegates arrived and almost entrusted Burrows with the task, while royal guests were still waiting behind them. Though tired, he continued to receive guests, planning to meet others after the ceremonies ended. King Exius and his queen quickly arrived, sincerely greeting the new ruler of Rasixa. Seeing Almos's value, Exius enthusiastically praised their alliance and asked to renew relations after their help in the war. News arrived that Rossi, the great northern kingdom, had sent a convoy to Rasixa. Although the emissary's visit was informal, he almost allowed them to enter without further delay. Mysterious woman-led Rosie Envoy entered the royal hall and politely greeted Elmos. Her confident posture unsettled Almos, leaving a deep impression, although her diplomatic role was quite limited. Soon, almost immediately, he was called to the palace for the long-awaited wedding and solemn coronation. Almost and Yuria joyfully reunited, their faces glowing with warmth as they prepared for the sacred ritual. Dressed in white, Yuria radiated beauty, and she was almost praised without any hesitation or distraction. Holding hands, they stepped forward together before the gathered audience in the ceremonial hall. Surrounded by relatives and noble guests, they were warmly welcomed as the ceremony officially began. They were almost called to the altar, standing next to Yuria, ready to complete their royal union. Petra stepped forward to conduct the ritual. She was chosen both by rank and because she was very close to them. Solemnly, she asked them to vow to support each other in everything that lies ahead. The ceremony continued, the sacred ring was almost ready, and the gods were called to be witnesses. Blessings echoed above them, pleas to the heavens for protection and a long life together as husband and wife. The ritual ended with the kiss of the vow, the final seal of their union. Moved to tears, Yuria embraced him almost tightly. Both promised to stay together forever. Their kiss sealed the marriage, and the crowd beneath the palace's sacred hall erupted in applause. Though officially married, Almos and Yuria knew one last matter remained before they could truly rest. He almost asked that no one look at you while you nervously prepared for the final public ceremony. Spectators gathered silently as the priests lit torches, preparing for Almos's solemn ascent to the throne. Masked actors reenacted the beheading of an ancient king, symbolizing an invasion from the past of Rosidi. Spectators were confused until Ainz explained the tradition, whose roots stretch back to the royal history of Adelmia. The masked figure symbolized the invaders, and the performance glorified the vengeful rise of the first king. He almost burst in to dramatically overthrow the invader, reenacting the triumph of the first king centuries ago. The ceremony ended almost on its Nisa gesture, symbolizing the revival of Rositsu through leadership, lineage, and shared memory. He stood almost proudly before the gods and people, announcing his ascension to the throne as the 20th Tsar. After the ceremony, he almost thanked his comrades, officially accepting the role of the new king of Rosidi. Urias rejoiced at this moment, but nearly reminded them that their duties and responsibilities had just begun. Suddenly, chaos erupted in the hall as a great creature approached from behind Alma. To everyone's surprise, a dead deer was suddenly thrown into the central aisle. And almost immediately before everyone appeared a griffin and presented him the deer as a gift for the coronation. The mighty griffin descended onto the city square, causing a commotion among the gathered crowd. People whispered and spread rumors when they finally confirmed the identity of Almost. The son of Griffin, who was previously not believed, was now revealed. Griffin doubted human customs, was confused in relationships, but sincerely respected Almaz's role as a central figure. Before leaving, Griffin praised Almaz's determination and insisted that everyone lend a hand when he begins to hesitate. Suddenly, Griffin recognized the figure in the cloak, Ethel's wife from 5 centuries ago. Whispers spread around as people realized that the mysterious woman had lived over 500 years ago. It turned out that this was Melen. She was the premier of Rosal and the founder of voodoo magic. Although she looked young, she once killed Ethel, the king conqueror who led the bloody invasion. Griffin took wine as a farewell and reminded them to visit the forest. He left, and his team, almost recognizing a fatherly role in him, began cleaning the palace yard. He almost admitted that he doubted his role. King Razate invited him to talk and reassured him. During dinner, Almaz asked if King Razidi regretted the purge, and a heavy pause fell in the hall. He almost confessed guilt but insisted that it was necessary. Rosti still considered him an idealist and too soft. Rosti insisted that only total purges would eliminate the risk. Ferme's failure and Tetra's betrayal were the best proof for him. Despite their differences, he almost declared his desire to end the war by peacefully uniting the continent. King Razadi acknowledged Almaz's dream and realized that his time as ruler was coming to an end. Just as he was about to express his hopes, Rosti clutched his chest and fell before finishing the sentence. He shouted when Rosti fainted, and the attendants immediately rushed to help the fallen king. Rosti later woke up in bed, and Yuria was shocked by his miraculous return. She recounted how she woke up in a blooming field, noticed a figure on the other side of the river, and only then regained consciousness. Rosti saw his late wife in a vision. She begged him to return. Something remained unfinished. Revived again, Rosti decided to enjoy his last years, waiting for the birth of his first grandchild. Almost remembering the heir, Yuria coquettishly replied, hinting that she was ready to conceive their child without hesitation. He expressed concern over Rigger's death, and Yuria explained that it happened due to magical backlash. Yuria revealed her power and allowed her to witness that moment. It was clear but uncontrollable. She told that the blessing was given to her by the fairies, but its hidden consequences remained a mystery for a long time until recently. That mysterious voice during the blessing surfaced in her memory again, and she did not know if it meant danger. The more people learned about it, the heavier the burden of the blessing became. The loss of support brought painful consequences, up to physical exhaustion. She almost pondered other hidden effects, but Yuri honestly admitted due to limitations she could not detect anything more. He recalled his path, the war, training, and changes, believing that his skill was the result of hard-earned growth. He almost confessed to his cruel past war, to purges and killings, but felt no remorse, and this deeply troubled him. He asked himself whether the blessing caused these feelings, and whether it influenced his decisions. He almost wondered if more followers made the blessing stronger, and if it subconsciously shaped behavior. Yuria suddenly saw clearly, just understanding the effect her seal disinteg. Although they understood that this blessing manipulated them, they sadly admitted they could neither resist nor change its nature. Even barely perceptible blessings can influence thoughts, and unintended wishes sometimes turn into deadly consequences. Contrary to expectations, he almost declared that he would protect life even if others demanded total extermination. He reminded Yurei that among his supporters there are those who also value saving others. He almost stood confidently, believing that his vision coincides with the path his people are already following. He realized the next step is to select loyal comrades who embody his ideals. He almost insisted that they set aside all other matters and only create the needed mood. Yuria responded warmly, accepting his courtship and asking him to be gentle and careful. When the couple spent the night together for the first time, their intimacy deepened, filled with confidence and trust. Elsewhere, others noticed that their night had begun and decided simply not to interfere. On the 5th day of the 7-Day War, the Allied cavalry rushed west across the open plains. Thanks to the insect-like scout, their commanders clearly saw how quickly Dalmorger's resistance was collapsing. With the help of flying creatures, the Mealing squad tracked enemy movements and relayed news beyond Adelina's northern border. After Dalmorger's defeat in the north, the generals argued whether to immediately launch an offensive through the weakened borders. Fearing that after the fall of Teria the country would be torn apart by civil war, they did not attackingly monitor Dalmorger. Melon, shrouded in mystery, reminded them that she was the one who raised the first king and his loyal circle. After bidding farewell to the king, Mealing gracefully withdrew to immerse herself in some personal, hitherto unknown research and duties. The soldiers whispered in admiration and bustled about, looking young but having lived and served for centuries without aging. Upon arriving home, she activated the entrance, and secret stairs leading underground opened before her. In her vast sanctuary, Mealing settled in, once again ready for tea and solitary magical research. While pouring tea, she explained that her research was 90% complete and approaching a powerful breakthrough. She revealed the fruit of many decades of effort, a magical blessing of partial immortality. Her body remained flawless and healed quickly, but death still lurked if it was completely destroyed. Despite immortality, Mealing confessed regret. 500 years of hardship weighed on her will. Driven by purpose, she sought not eternal life, but magic so powerful it could challenge the gods. Mealing wondered what immortality would bring, peace or something far more dangerous. She feared immortality might turn into an eternal nightmare, but vowed never to die like Ethel. Her goal became clear: to resurrect Ethel and return to their homeland no matter the cost. Mealing recalled the familiar soul of Almas and waved it off. He was not a threat to Rosal. Although he was drawn to their common origin, Mealing mocked those who feared storming the borders with forbidden experiments. Urasaki Mari, confident and always calculating, silently sipped tea, pondering her plans. Somewhere in the Razis sect, Almas relaxed in a remote mountain hot spring. Enjoying the sulfur water and the view, he admired the relaxing atmosphere of the hot spring. Nearby, two girls were also bathing, enjoying the warmth and peace after a long journey. They agreed that the coziness of the spring had settled in their souls, and so whenever they could, they returned for that peace. The group discussed local customs and noticed with surprise that Adelin rarely washed due to long distances and travel customs. Yuria suggested arranging accessible hot springs, and Almas hesitated. He was worried about the costs and how to organize it all. They reminded Almas that as king, he deserved a little luxury from time to time, especially when taxes were rising. Almas anxiously thought about the intervention of the nobility. He feared that land distribution would again empower factions like Debels. Although centralization progressed slowly, they admitted, some reforms will require decisive actions and long-term efforts for implementation. Yuri, quoting his father's words, asked Almas if he really intended to unite Adelinia. Almas recalled the former king's desire and firmly explained that unification depends on how strong the kingdom becomes. At first, he planned a reform, to tax every piece of land and step by step undermine the power of the nobility. He explained that by giving power to the people, it is possible to balance and counteract the influence of the aristocrats. He believed, over time, when coins and power reach the people, they themselves will begin to demand their rights. They agreed that political interest among the people will inevitably flourish as soon as prosperity and a sense of their own strength take root. Almas passionately insisted that the issuance of coins and democratic influence will gradually support lasting unity through a slow civic transition. To dispel the heavy mood, one girl playfully interrupted the conversation and reminded that the trip was for rest. Almas nodded, acknowledging her correctness, and then emphasized that the next ruler must be chosen honestly. Tetra proposed the child of Urias as the heir, placing the unity of the kingdom above all, and the others gratefully accepted her arguments. After a heartfelt conversation, the three sat by the spring, rested, and planned the future of the kingdom. Almas received a letter from the king of Nadmir. Burrows brought it with a worried expression and a palpable urgency. The letter revealed a wedding in the kingdom of Exes and almost proved that it was connected to Mutsail. Although the purge succeeded, the lingering resentment shook stability. They almost decided not to intervene and to trust others. Almost chose diplomacy instead of internal actions. From now on, his main task was to strengthen relations with other countries. He carefully studied the map. Retail was surrounded by 4 kingdoms, and Exes had already become an ally. The rise of Ratashi alarmed the southern kingdoms, and Almos noticed Burweld and Ebial were the next and immediate threat. The uncertainty about Almos frightened neighboring kingdoms, and the alliance could completely cut off Ridisha. Almos was preparing his first diplomatic visit to Exe, a sign of loyalty to the ally and a hint at serious strategic intentions. This visit became a sign of diplomatic return. Previously, they had overdone it, so now Almos would go alone. Raymond joined Almos through the Alma Ridge. Their journey began with mutual respect and a common goal. Almos agreed to Raymond's request to speak plainly with him. Ruzu was entrusted to vigilantly guard Yuri. She and Almos arrived at the surplus capital. The area was windy and sparsely wooded. In the Alma's castle, he kept telling himself, "Do not make empty promises during negotiations with King Exo." He almost formally greeted King Exes and Mutsail. With Mutsail nearby, trust was given much more easily. King Exes gladly accepted the profit-sharing terms, sensing an opportunity, but remained cautious about the economic balance in the alliance. Prince Matil solemnly greeted Alma. The rest of the royal family began to introduce themselves one by one. Matil confirmed that his mother recovered thanks to Uria, almost sincerely sighed with relief upon hearing this news. He suspected that Prince Laduz's curse was connected, as if it grew out of rivalry between the consort families. Museo joyfully rushed to greet Almos. While Laduz lingered, it was clear he was uncomfortable because the first royal greeting went to Museo. He almost noticed how Laduz was intently watching Mutse. Suspicions sharpened Laduz might be involved in that veil. Here Museo proudly and confidently introduced his fiancée Rakvilla to Almos. Raquel apologized for not being present earlier and admitted her condition then did not allow her to properly introduce herself. He almost complimented her on her beauty, and this awakened light jealousy in his companion Tetra. She was standing nearby and watching. Tetra scolded him for that remark. Museo shifted the conversation to preparations for the ceremony and the task. Mutsuo quickly finished the introductions, leaving Almos behind, and left together with Raquilla even before the questions could continue. Finally, Almos greeted Prince Ladus, who responded politely but distantly, with an empty expression on his face. Ladus hurriedly apologized and stepped away, and Almos and Tetra felt his detachment and called him the most mysterious. The first day of the wedding began. Mutsuo warmly welcomed Almos and conducted negotiations easily, not at all like his father. Soon a grand banquet was arranged, and the guests, including him and Tetra, enjoyed generous portions of roasted lamb. On the second day, Mutsuo thanked Ruzio. Their long-standing alliance had lasted since the first negotiations. The wedding ceremony solemnly began. Raquilla sat next to Museo, and the guests froze in respectful silence. I almost discovered that this was not the real ceremony. The true vow was only spoken at the finale. He served Museo wine from Rizio and blessed him and Raquilla with peace and prosperity. On the last day, Almos sincerely congratulated them. Tetra drew his attention to something. Uria explained the ritual, the sacred sacrifice of a sheep, offered to the gods of excess and the ancestors. Mutsuo and Raquilla swore to each other before the tribe, thus the official sacred wedding ceremony concluded. Yuri was about to visit the third concubine, almost decided to stay for another day. The wedding ended quietly. He was almost ready to leave and again turned his thoughts to diplomatic affairs. Diplomatic negotiations began. Elmos and Raymond sat opposite King Ixaz and Prince Matil at the negotiation table. The meeting once again confirmed old agreements. Almos and Ixaz shook hands, firmly sealing political trust between the kingdoms. King Almos and Raymond arrive at the capital of the Exist tribe. They are greeted by a local guide. The alliance meeting begins almost without demands, only hope for smooth mutual understanding without conflicts. Exchanging brief greetings, Almos, Matil, and the leader of X's officially opened negotiations between the two growing countries. Sincerely grateful for the cavalry support in the previous war, he almost praises the warriors of Exes for their decisive strength. He proposes a trade wool and horses. Exes offers materials from rare animals. Negotiations slowly and confidently move forward. Exist asks for wheat, wine, and any surplus, and almost asks, what else do they really need? To everyone's surprise, Exes demands not only iron tools but also puts forward strange and significant requests in diplomacy. Exes searches for iron to prepare for war and for the fields, and with horror notices that in Razazi it is almost lacking. Almost suggests sending blacksmiths instead of tools, hoping to repay past help without wasting extra resources. Axis agrees. Both sides prepare for knowledge exchange. Training in ironworking begins to be beneficial for both. The Axis leader suddenly changes the subject and asks Almos to share his opinion about the mysterious object. Nadal raises a pink, gem-like stone and seems intrigued as he examines it when given permission. Almost understands that it is rock salt. Mythil explains that it is from Axis, recently found underground. He realizes that Axis is exporting rock salt. If prices fall, Razes' economy could suffer. IXIS lacks extraction technology, so the leader asks for almost all his help to extract and process the resource. Ixis offers to sell rock salt cheaply and almost starts calculating profit from resale via the Coronation trade route. Almost doubts that indirect proposal. Ixis says hostile tribes block trade with the Coronatians, so Razes' help is needed. Middle admits their tribe lacks trading skills, so they rely on Reizisa. She reliably handles business with foreigners. Almost reflects back, Ixis seeks only the bare essentials: wheat and wine, nothing luxurious and nothing that would destabilize the economy. Accepting the deal is almost agreeing to support the plan and immediately starts serious alliance negotiations. Magic combed through the consort's chambers and replied that there is no ancient curse here. Tension is now on Rachel's marriage. Everyone asks whether ancient curses affected her union. Yuri confesses she and Mitsu are relatives by royal blood, and this undermines the political balance and stirs their hearts. Minal gathered family ties bit by bit, and fear of internal danger awakened again due to the reshuffling of powers. Despite slight concern, they confirm that there is peace between the spouses. Tension is under control, but has not disappeared at all. The women whisper about the indifference of the second concubine. She avoided quarrels, peacefully renouncing her claims. Although he is a respected warrior, the father supports peace and does not get involved in political power struggles. Instead of favoring bloodline, he supported Prince Matil, because above all he valued the unity of the tribe against threats like lupus. We have succession, a matter of tradition. The firstborn customarily inherits everything, though no one knows what the elder truly thinks. It is Prince Lados himself who was once kind, who now mocks Mati and Mutsu. His transformation sows quiet anxiety and fear. In his room, Lados clutches a photo of Rachel. His soul is eaten away by grief and jealousy toward Mazel. He remembers how he was declared the future king, but with all his heart, he only wanted to be near Rachel. Mysterious woman appears in the room. Lados hears her voice and panics from fear. The woman in the cloak promises Lados the throne and Rachel, skillfully playing on his sadness and hidden ambition.